This morning for our city council budgeting basics budgeting meeting. We've got a number of budgeting items we've got to go through so we can get on the right track moving forward. Ruth, could you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Adamson?
Here.
Gray?
Here.
Cheatham?
Here.
Lurick?
Here.
Ortega?
Here.
Stevens?
Here.
Glad?
Here. Thank you. We'll move to agenda item number 2 is city budget development training. Finance staff will provide a training for the city council on basics of city budgeting. Good morning, Ashley.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Ashley Walsh, Chief Financial Officer.
Hello, Council and Mayor. Bonnie Schrader, Deputy CFO and Deputy Treasurer.
So Bonnie is here to help me. She's kind of new to this whole process, but we're going to be working through this together. So our first presentation, we're going to go through some city budgeting basics just so everyone has an idea of kind of how the city's set up and why we do things. So the city budget process, the budget year starts October 1 and ends on September 30th of every year. That is our fiscal year. The planning process generally starts about 6 months before the fiscal year starts. So we're starting now. We usually start with salary projections, and then we have the department meetings with the council, and then we go through the tax solution. So you get to hear from every department, and I will go through how they're gonna do those presentations a little bit later. So the financial cycle, you can see, starts with the budget cycle. We appropriate the budget. We also adopt fees during that time. When the departments present, they will present their expenses, and also if they think they're going to have any increase in revenues, if they want to increase any of their fees, they will bring those too as well during their presentations. Then we execute the fiscal year. We monitor the budget execution and amend the budget as needed for any unforeseen expenses that come up or any unforeseen revenues that come in, so that we can use those. And then we report on the closed fiscal year in coordination with the audit, which is what we're doing right now. We are working on the CAPR to be able to, we need to have that done by the end of this month to see kind of how we did for the year. So we're just going to go over the basics of funds because governmental accounting is a little bit different than regular accounting. So if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of its own beast, right? So what is a fund? A fund is an accounting entity with a self-balancing set of accounts. You can kind of think of it as its own checkbook. So it's its own set of money, can be used for its own purpose. So we use funds to clarify how resources are being directed at various programs, mostly because we have tax funding. We also have different monies that come in from the state and the county that have to be used for certain purposes. So we keep track of everything in their own fund. We are also able to maintain tighter control over resources, and we're able to monitor what comes in and out of those funds if we have them set aside. So there's 3 different types of funds. We're going to kind of go over 2 of them. Governmental funds are generally tax-supported funds. They can also have fees, but the main source of revenue for those is tax. Proprietary funds are like the business-type funds. So those are mostly funded by user fees. And then fiduciary funds are just trustee funds. So we're not really going to talk about those. Those are things that kind of like sales tax. We collect it and then we send it to the state. So we have a few of those. We also have our police pension plan that's kind of a trust fund that we hold for those police retirees, and we administer that plan to them. So the governmental funds that we have the general fund, we have special revenue funds, we also have debt service funds and capital projects funds. So I'm going to just go through each of these so you guys have a little bit of an idea of how those work and how they're kind of split up. So the general fund is the general operating fund. It includes all government functions that aren't categorized under any other fund. So for us, we have mayor and council, finance, custodial or city hall, building, planning, engineering, HR, non-departmental, economic development, legal, police, fire, animal services, parks, and parks and rec admin. So these are all the departments that are within the general fund. The general fund is also the only fund that can move money to any other fund. So they're ultimately responsible for all of the funds within the city. So if a fund for some reason has a deficiency, the general fund is responsible to take care of that at any time. I know that we had that come up a few years ago. So the general fund is ultimately responsible for every fund within the city. If anything happens and a fund goes defunct, they have to take care of that. So this is just a little bit of a breakdown of the general fund. You can see the majority is police and fire. I just kind of lumped all the administrative funds together. That would be mayor's office, finance, HR, and legal. I just kind of put those together, or else this pie chart would be kind of crazy. So you can look over this. It just kind of shows a breakdown of the budget for these funds, or these departments within the general fund.
Ashley?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what's non-departmental?
Non-departmental is for things that the council, like Family Services Alliance. It also helps cover the transit system.
Okay.
So any contributions that we give goes into the non-departmental
Okay.
fund.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, we also have special revenue funds. These funds are created to kind of report money that's reserved for specific purposes. The biggest one is street. Street funds can only be used for certain items. We do have to report on that every year. We also have recreation, cemetery, airport, library, transit, environmental science, and CDBG. Transit and CDBG are generally grant funded, and so we keep those separate because they are receiving a lot of grant money. So you can see here's the breakdown of those funds. Street, again, is one of the biggest. Recreation, cemetery, airport, and library also receive tax money. Transit, CDBG, and environmental science transit and CDBG are grant funded mostly. Transit does have a little bit of tax money from the general fund that helps support that. And then environmental science is funded by water and WPC. So it's kind of more of an internal service fund, but we have it as a special revenue fund. We also have debt service funds. The city only has one debt service fund. It is for the repayment of the animal shelter bond. We are required to keep those funds that money in a separate fund so that they can see that we're paying it separately. This also receives property tax. I believe last year we were at about $228,000 for the principal and interest on that payment. So it's not a huge amount, but we do keep track of it in its own separate fund. All right, we do have some capital projects funds. These are used to account for the purchasing, building, renovating equipment, structures, and other capital assets. It doesn't include the capital assets or improvements paid for by the proprietary funds or like sanitation, water, WPC. These are mostly just tax funded funds that kind of just keep that money a little bit separate. So when they're creating and building capital, they can kind of keep track of that in a separate fund. So we have the federal aid projects funds, which is where we get a lot of the ITD money that we're able to do a lot of those large projects that that have actually been brought to council in the last little while. We also have a street improvement fund, an airport improvement fund, and the capital improvement fund is kind of our catch-all for everyone else that gets tax money. We have kind of a savings account set aside there that can only be used for capital purposes, which are generally one-time purchases. So we have a savings account set aside for that so that we can have that money when capital improvements arise. So the proprietary funds, we have enterprise and internal service funds. The enterprise funds are providing a good or service to the public for a fee. So they are actually self-supporting. So we have sanitation, water, WPC, and our ambulance fund, because it is funded by Bannock County, is considered an enterprise fund. So here's a breakdown of these. You can see generally it's water and WPC. I just wanted to show you these, but like I said, they are self-supporting by user fees. They don't take any tax money. And we can't take any money from these and move it to any other departments. It's the same way with any other fund besides the general fund. So we can't say we're going to use something for street and move it to a different location. Once it's in street, it has to stay there. We also have quite a few internal service funds. So these are used to track goods or services that are shifted kind of between departments. So we bring these to council and kind of set them up on a cost reimbursement basis. So we go through and see what the funds, what their budget is, and we kind of break that up based on some formulas of usage and things like that to who's going to pay for it. So these are paid for both by tax funds and by enterprise funds. So it's they're kind of mixed as far as their funding goes. So you can see the biggest ones here. We have fleet, IT, utility billing. We also have a fuel fund that the city employees can use for fuel for city vehicles. And then the retirement payout fund is a big one that we set aside money for retirements in there. And that way, if they don't go that year, we have that money already set aside. It helps with the budgeting for the next year. So we do have that retirement payout fund. Everyone puts a percentage of their salaries into there to help to cover any retirement payoffs that may arise.
So Ashley,
Yeah.
we're looking at this, so these things like fleet, IT, they're funded by both general fund tax dollars and utilities or enterprise
Yes.
funds.
Yep. And it is we can do that because they're providing a service. So it's not like we're just moving whatever we want in there. We're saying, hey, you use this percentage of the time, so this is how much you pay for it. Does that make sense?
So yeah, we can track what.
Yes.
I'm just concerned about the enterprise fund part of that, making sure that.
So we have some pretty robust spreadsheets for how all of these funds are receiving their money.
Okay.
And so if we ever needed to support that, we would have documentation to show why they're paying for that service and why they're paying that much for that service.
Okay.
So generally they're broken up by like total expenses, number of employees, salary costs, those types of things.
Okay.
Fleet is based on VEUs, so vehicles, and so we have some pretty robust spreadsheets that break out how these are funded.
Okay.
Some of them, like the utility billing fund, is funded all by enterprise funds, and that is done through the rate study.
Okay.
Okay?
The retirement payout,
Uh-huh.
we've set aside retirement for somebody. They don't go. That money stays in that retirement fund for that person.
For that
because
person specifically, yes.
We set it aside because they have indicated that they may
Right.
go.
And that's a pretty conservative way to go. You could also, I mean, we have a big sheet for the CAFR that shows everybody that could potentially go, which means you're vested and you're over 55 years old. We don't put money aside for everybody that's in that pool because that would be really expensive. We only do it for people that actually come to us and say, hey, I could retire this year. I'm going to put in my intent to retire. That doesn't mean they're going to for sure. It just means that they could. So we set aside money for them, and that money is set aside for that specific person. I have a huge sheet that shows that it's for that specific person.
That only happens once though. We don't tax every year
No.
for that person to retire.
Right. The only thing that we would take was, I usually look at the difference. So let's say you were going to retire and your payout was $20,000. You didn't go. Your payout for the next year is going to be $30,000. So we would take that difference.
Okay.
So that we have your full retirement
we've
payout.
got- yeah.
Yep.
So how much does it affect the budget if somebody didn't indicate they were going to retire? Just said, I'm through.
It hurts.
Okay.
It also depends on how long, and how much their payoff is. If their payoff's not a lot, we have people coming in and out and turnover, and the department just kind of has to absorb that within their budget. But large retirements, a lot of times we will come and do a budget amendment and take some of this savings that's not allocated to a specific person and move it over. Because if you're a small department and you have somebody go that you're not expecting, it can hurt pretty bad. It can really affect their budget because they're
So
not expecting that.
if we move the money over, does it come back out of that department the next year somehow? Or is it
No.
just, so the department's benefit?
Well, so the department puts aside, I think it's like a 1% of their salaries every year. So, and it's only for that department. So I can only move what that department has in savings. If they don't have anything, they have to absorb it.
Okay.
So yeah, it is a benefit if they have savings, but if they don't, then,
If they're real loyal to their department and they say, I'm just going to go without telling them,
right,
then they keep the money in the department and it comes out of general fund.
Well, it comes out of their department fund. So let's take finance.
okay,
All right. Bonnie's decided she's done. She's worked here 20 years. She's done. She's not going to indicate it. We haven't budgeted for it within the finance
right.
retirement budget. She comes in. She says, "I'm done. I'm finished. I'm out next week." We still have to pay her that payout.
Right.
You don't have any savings in that. Finance department has to cut the budget to take care of Bonnie's payout.
Well, I heard that it came out of a budget amendment in general fund.
We could, if they have savings, we could
So
amend for that.
we only go to their savings out of general fund. We don't go to general fund as a budget transfer amendment?
No.
Okay.
No,
That's what I thought.
sorry.
So,
I needed to clarify, so thank you. Are there any other questions about that? We have found a lot of savings by putting this money aside. We still have to budget for it, but the money moves over, so it's not a tax impact. So I know we say we only have to budget for it once. We only pay for it once. We budget for it as many times as they say they're going to retire. But that money's covered. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
I guess that was my real question is we're not taxing
Correct.
2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times.
Right. And that's kind of what we were doing in the past because we didn't really have a good handle on how this is working. So if you said you were going to retire for 5 years, you're in the budget, then there's nothing to cover it besides what was in savings. So we move all of these over. They can only be used for that purpose. Departments can't use your retirement savings to purchase a vehicle or for any operating.
anything else.
It's specifically for that purpose and that person.
But if that person didn't go and somebody else did, is that money so specifically attached to the person that they could not use that money for person X versus person W?
Correct, they can't. It's for that person specifically. Yep. All right, so generally, last year I know we kind of had some bumps in the road with the budget. We weren't able to really present our capital improvement plan. That is something that I want to do again this year. It's basically a long-term planning document. When we presented it in 2019, it was more of just an informational item for the council to see, what projects out there are needed within the next 5 years, so that we can kind of plan for them. When you approve a capital projects plan, we put it in the budget, but we're not saying, yes, we're going to fund all of these projects next year. We're only funding the projects within the current budget. So when we put that plan together, it might have a whole bunch of projects on there. It's more of just a planning tool to see what we're going to need. We're not required to fund all of those in the future. So just remember that when we put that plan together. What I did for 2019's budgets, I just went out to all the departments, said, hey, what do you have going on in the next 5 years? That's going to be a capital improvement plan, which was any purchase over $100,000. Just so the council could be aware of, what was out there, to see if maybe we wanted to set aside savings or if we were going to have to tax for something, bond for something. So it's just a planning document that I feel is a good thing for council to have for planning.
So then how does this long-range planning document drop into some kind of citywide strategic plan?
We could put it within the citywide strategic plan, but we currently don't really have one. So this would probably be a part, like if we did an overall city 5-year
Right.
plan, this would be just a small part of it.
So we don't have anything that we can use to see kind of where we think we might want to be and how we might get there 5 years out or 10 years out. We don't have
We
strategic
have that
planning.
for, like the rate study does a 5-year plan. I know that a lot of departments have plans, like 5-year plans. I know police does. I think fire has like a master plan.
We asked a year or two ago, we asked all the departments to put a 5-year plan together so we could have an idea of where we
Okay.
were moving forward, and it would probably be a matter of just pulling everything together to see what that looked like. And I think that's kind of where this long-range plan came
Right.
from in 19. Now, I don't know about this year, 20, because we didn't get
We
something
didn't
put
really,
together.
I mean, we planned for the projects that we were going for this year, but we didn't really look at what was coming. I mean,
Yeah.
somewhat in the department presentations, but we didn't go a deep dive into the capital
Yeah.
improvements.
So from a CFO perspective, managing, even though, budgetary things, thanks to our friends in the legislature, can be mercurial, I guess would be an appropriate word. But from your perspective as CFO, managing potential risk, et cetera, do you believe it would be helpful for the city to have an honest to goodness compiled long-range
absolutely.
plan?
Absolutely, yes. And I've been to budgeting trainings, and long-range planning was a big topic at those. I mean, they can be extremely expensive. A lot of people pay consultants to come in and go through everything and kind of see, you know, a 5-year, a 10-year. But I think it would be very, very helpful as far as planning goes, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So some of our major revenue sources, property tax, of course. We also receive sales tax, which is being looked at right now in the legislation. Building permits, state liquor tax, franchise fees. We get electric, natural gas, and cable. So these are fees that are, they're different for every type. I think that natural gas is 1%. It's a percentage of their revenues. And the reason that we're able to charge that franchise fee, it's actually in state code, is because the city could provide those services and we're choosing not to. So we are able to collect a portion of the revenue from these 3 types of businesses to fund some of the general fund. So that's why we're able to charge them that. We also receive magistrate court fees, which is any of the fees that come from the county. Highway user fees, county road and bridge, cemetery, and then user fees is the big one, especially for the enterprise funds. So when we're going through our major revenues, every single one of these is brought to the council for what we kind of want to estimate for the next year. So budgeting is just a big, huge estimate. So we bring all of these to you. A lot of times AIC will have recommendations as to, hey, you know, we think sales tax is going to increase 5% for the year. So we kind of bring as much information as we can to the council to try to make decisions on where we want to set our revenues for the next year.
So going back to, you talked about, you know, projecting salary costs and so forth. So in my layperson's world, that would translate into fixed costs, essentially. And then it sounds as though we have a way on the other end to project our potential revenue. And so then again, from a layperson's perspective, it seems as though if you take the projected income and you subtract the projected fixed costs, you end up with essentially what you have some discretion around in the middle. Is that a
Yeah, and the fixed cost isn't just going to be personnel, because you do need,
Right.
you know,
right?
things for them to be able to do their job, but yes.
So that would be possible. So we could go into budgeting saying, for example, okay, so if we, our part of the levy pie, you know, we want to aim for, you know, asking for no more than X percent, that would generate, give or take, about X amount of money, and therefore, if we adopted that as a goal, we could say basically to everyone, including the public, okay, we have about X amount to work with for departments. Okay, great.
Yeah, so we were going to, this year we're going to bring the revenue sources to you first, and then we're going to update them at the end. Because AIC, their conference is in April, and so we're going to have better numbers the longer we wait, and also we go off of what we receive on a quarterly basis. Most of these are quarterly, some of them are monthly. So we're going to bring them up front to kind of give you an idea of where we're going, but we're also going to bring them back at the end to have a better idea of where our revenues are going to be. And we don't really know the property tax situation early either, so we're still gonna kind of keep the same way, but we're gonna show the revenues first, kind of I don't know, it's not gonna be as good of an estimate, and then we'll bring it back to get a better estimate at the end.
Will we bring it back as soon as AIC has their...
The plan was to bring it back before tax solution, so we'll do revenues, department presentations, then we'll do revenues again to kind of have a better picture of where we're at, what we have to spend, and where we can put that money.
Okay.
Okay. Some of the major expenditures, the biggest one, personnel.
Ashley?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're
to
fine.
Back us up to major revenue sources. What about the web? We have some cities that are providing internet services,
I can.
some that are not. Is that included in the state statute to be able to?
I don't believe so. I don't know if it's specific. I don't know. We'd have to look at that. It's kind of a new I know that that is an
I know that's a
older
new
code and that's kind of a
thing.
new thing, so we can look at it and see if there's anything. Write that down. I didn't know that cities were providing that service.
Well, Ammon is the big, is one that's,
Okay.
that is a big player in that, and then there's a couple other cities that have started to provide that, but I think they're excluding any of the others from providing, though I'm not sure of that. but-
Okay, yeah, we can, I can work with legal and look into that.
Okay.
Is that like cities that, I know some larger cities just have like free Wi-Fi throughout the city. Is that similar? You're talking about they're providing it,
When
they're an
they-
internet service provider
Yeah.
to
Yeah, they're
customers?
the internet service provider, and they're mandating that people have that to their house. If they don't want it, they don't have to hook it up, but if they don't want
wanna
internet
get fiber.
service,
Yeah,
and they do that.
It's as much the infrastructure as water.
Yeah, yeah.
but what about those cities that are just providing that for
Free?
free?
I don't think that's the cities as much as it is you've got a sponsor of it that's sponsoring free Wi-Fi throughout or something. I don't know a whole lot about that.
Just curious. Thanks.
Okay. Major expenditures, personnel, supplies, services is a big one where we pay for any type of service. Capital, we also have debt service. So we have the animal shelter bond. We also have a few WPC bonds, a water bond. So that's where the debt service comes from. And then we have some miscellaneous costs. So I broke it out in this chart for you. You can see that personnel is over half of our expense. So that's the big one. Capital can kind of move up or down depending on what projects we have. I know that the big WPC phosphorus plant was a really big capital expense. So it kind of just depends. Honestly, most of those are within the rate study. So we have either the money set aside in reserves or the money that's going to be coming in from fees to be able to take care of some of those capital purchases. So that's just kind of a breakdown of our major expenditures. All right, so we are required to have a balanced budget, which means that our appropriations, basically what we're going to spend, cannot exceed the resources that are available. The GFOAs come out to say, you know, yeah, a balanced budget is good, but you can balance your budget with one-time money and use it for continued operating. So you could have a balanced budget but not be in a really good financial position. So the GFOAs come out to say we want a structurally balanced budget, which means that recurring revenues are sufficient to cover recurring expenditures. So you're not using this one-time money to cover operating costs. So basically we're taking any available fund balance, which we're gonna go over the reserve policy in a little bit, and then any of our estimated revenues are supposed to cover our funds that are available for appropriation. So that's kind of the little formula there when we're balancing our budget. So here's the reserve policy. In 2016, the council adopted a reserve policy. Basically, it's 25% of the next year's expenditures. So we set the budget. We have the budget set usually in September. So we can say, hey, you know, this general fund, this is your 25%. I will be presenting some of those numbers next week to you. We can also excess reserves that we have, so in excess of that 25%, those can only be used for one-time expenditures. That is in the policy. We can't use them for to fund a position. If we do use them to fund a position, we can do it for 1 year, and then we have to take that money in taxes or fees. So we can use the reserves either during the next budget cycle or with budget amendments. I know that we brought some budget amendments to you that we're using reserves or excess reserves, and finance is monitoring that to make sure that we don't get below that 25%. If we do get below that 25%, it has to be approved by council, and we also have to determine if we need to have a plan to kind of get those reserves back up to where they should be. So that was one of the things within that reserve policy, was to monitor that pretty closely.
So if we're over the 25%, anything that we spend over that for the one-time purchase also needs to come in front of council.
Yes, and we generally do that during the budgeting cycle, or we'll do it during a budget amendment.
Okay.
Yep.
Is
Because
there a dollar amount attached to that? I mean, if it's $5, that's one thing. If it's $500,000, it's something else.
any amendment to the budget, if we're spending anything over, a lot of times a department, if they have an expense come up that's, $1,000, they'll just say, hey, I can probably do without this, and I'll, but it's honestly up to the department head and the fund manager to say at what point that is for them. And it also kind of depends on how big. Like if finance had a $5,000 expense, I'd probably have to come before you and ask for that. If street had a $5,000 expense, they could probably absorb that within their budget. So it kind of just depends on the department. But yeah, anytime we spend more, you're fine. We come to council for that.
Sorry.
Everybody up here has the plague. For God's sake.
I know, I'm worried, I don't either.
Yeah, so those all come before council. All of those.
I may be the first coronavirus in Idaho.
That was a joke, everybody watching. That was a joke. We don't believe that's.
All right, are there any questions? I'm also going to go over kind of our budgeting process, but this was just kind of give you an idea of how, the city's set up, how budgeting works in general.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
I want to go back to this reserve policy. I think that I want to understand that, and I want people at home to understand this reserve policy as good as we can understand it. We've set a reserve of 25%. If I remember right, which I'm confident that I do, it was mostly in case something happens and the city is falling apart, we can still continue operations for 3 months.
Correct, yep. And that the 25% comes from GFOA best practices. They generally say like 3 months or 25% was easier for us. The enterprise funds are a little bit different because they are required to have certain money set aside for planned operational and capital expenditures. That's all within the rate study. So it might not be the 25%, but we go off of what the rate study says they need to have. So they're a little bit different because we do pay for that rate study. So we just kind of go off of what they say they need to have for reserves for different projects and things that are coming up.
Okay, explain to everybody watching at home what GFOA is.
So the GFOA is the Government Finance Officers Association. They have a lot of government trainings. They have a lot of best budgeting practices that they put together. They're also the one that grant us the award for our budget book, our CAFR, and then our popular report. So they're just a government agency or not a government agency, but they help other government agencies with those types of things.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I just want to be clear, anything that we spend from the budget, from the reserves, anything that we spend there comes in front of council before anybody can spend that money. I mean.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Those all come before council.
Thank you.
And you'll see a lot of them probably during the budgeting process, if they have excess reserves. If they don't have excess reserves, then they can't use that as a funding source.
So where, for example, I believe that the city has budgeted for a city development person, but that position has not been filled for, I think, at least this year and last year.
3 years.
So where does that money go, and how do we keep track of it so that we know, that it hasn't been used for something for which it wasn't designated?
It goes into reserves. So it goes into general fund reserves to help build those.
And does it go there with a tag, or it just disappears?
Once it's in reserves, it's not tagged to any function. So like if my finance department, if we gave back to reserves, if we were under budget by $10,000, that would go in. If police was under budget by $1 million, that would go in. And it's all just, at that point, it is general fund reserves. It's not designated to a certain department.
So how would we, for example, make sure that we're not taxing for positions we don't then fill, which then essentially become just a general revenue source? How would the council ensure that if we got to the end of a year, for example, and money that was budgeted for a position that wasn't filled, how could we ensure that doesn't get taxed for again? I mean,
You can't.
Is there any budgeting practice that we can roll that into that same position instead of tax for that position the next year, roll that into the same position?
Because it's at that point it is reserves. So you're looking at your reserve policy. The general fund is not over that 25%, so we could not use that. It's also a position, which is not a one-time expense. So that is why you wouldn't be able to use it for that purpose.
Well, you had said we could use, I thought you said, we could use one-time money for a position providing the next year it was budgeted
Yes, that is
for.
correct, yes.
So there's no way, if we're over the 25%. So if, for example, that the money designated for that position went into the general fund with just an internal tag, and we were over the 25%, then in theory, if we wanted to include that position in the next year's budget, we could budget
Yes.
it for 1 year or 2 years, whatever. So is there a way to go back and if there is money over the 25%, tag the equivalent of that position for 2 years so that since we've asked the taxpayers to pay for it, we haven't actually filled it? You know, I think it would be kind of nice if it's legally possible to have that, again, to use a layperson's concept, escrowed,
Right,
so that we're not taxing them a third time.
right, and you could do that for a year, yes. If you had that excess reserves, you could say, hey, we're gonna use this for this position for this year, and then next year we're going to fund it.
So-
But you could potentially use excess reserves for something else.
Right. Right.
So you didn't have to
Right.
take some tax money
Right.
for it.
But is there a way by going through the books to go back and say the equivalent for the 2 budget cycles that has been budgeted for that person is X amount,
Absolutely.
so that at least we know, and then it becomes a decision point. Do we want to, if we go forward and budget for that position again, do we want to ask the taxpayers to fund a hypothetical position one more time? Or do we want to make a decision that, no, we've already requested that money, taken that money from taxpayers, and therefore we will use it only for that purpose or a closely aligned purpose?
Yeah, we can, it's all budgeted for in its own department division, so it'd be really easy to see
Okay.
what we had budgeted for.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, are there any other questions?
Well, I guess one, so theoretically, we subtract ready and we subtract Bannock development.
Correct.
And the balance after subtracting those things is what should have been transferred every year.
Yep,
for economic
you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's just those 2 in economic development, and the rest is for that position.
That's the only department I think I could get the 3 categories.
Yeah, it's really small.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashley. We'll move to agenda item number 3, which is City of Pocatello Budget Process Training. Finance staff will provide training for the City Council on how the City of Pocatello budgeting process works, including information about property taxes. Now, Ashley, I'm going to tell you, in about 15 minutes, we are going to take a break. At that point, we need to take a break for a few minutes, and so
Okay, you just stop me if you need to.
we will do
I
that.
might be able to get through it though.
Okay. I don't think so.
I'm not gonna, there's no guarantee.
I don't think so. We'll
Okay.
go from there.
So we're gonna basically talk about the budget process. There's 4 stages. We're gonna go over a little bit of property tax and property taxes, property tax review, and levy limitation. Okay, so this is the budget process flow chart. We basically have like the pre-budget, which is what we're in right now, budget estimates, preliminary budget, and the final budget. So I'm gonna kind of go over how this is a timeline also. So the pre-budget starts with salary projections, which we are starting, we're doing some on Friday, we're doing the rest of them on Monday. So we're starting those right now. We also update the interfund information. So that is what I talked about earlier, the internal service funds that are funded by other departments. We start building those spreadsheets so that we can get the numbers that we need to present to council. Because generally those are kind of fixed, like here's what their budget is, so here's what they need to be able to function, basically. We also discuss budget objectives with staff, and we review and update any financial policies. So we do have financial policies out there. We kind of like to look at those. If there's anything that's come up over the prior year that we need to add, we can add those and bring those to council at that time. So budgeting estimates, the departments analyze their,
I don't know where you're headed, so I have to ask a question of where we're at. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
When you discuss budget objectives with staff, where does the council's role in?
It generally comes from the council.
Okay, so we need to determine before you talk to staff what our objectives are.
Yes, and that is why we're having this meeting and the meeting next week.
Okay.
To kind of go over what the council's objectives for this budget cycle are. So yeah, we're going to present some more information next week. We're also going to present any new positions that were requested, just to kind of give you, you can make decisions on how you want, what you want to do with the new positions at that time. But yeah, we will bring all this to you. So you're very involved in this process. So the budget estimates is when the departments go through and they analyze their budget information. So they're told to come in flat. So they have the ability, if, like, let's say Animal Services had a bill for $50,000 and they're like, hey, you know what, this last year we only had $35,000, but we really needed that money over here. They can move things in between those lines. They can't increase anything at that time, but they can move between the lines based on, what they want to see for their department. Everyone's a little bit different in how they manage their budget. Some people just look at the bottom line. Some people are really line specific. So it just kind of depends on the department head and how they want their budget to look. So they make changes as needed.
And within that process, if I, for example, wanted more information than just a bottom line, am I able to request that? And then also, where in the process, for example, if I wanted to see what it would look like, for departments 5, 7, and 12, what it would look like if they needed to come up with a budget that was a 10% reduction, so that I could understand what impact that might or might not have on the public, and what potential mitigating solutions could be applied. Where in the process can those kinds of requests be made?
We can do that during the department presentations. They can build it flat, then you can come in and say, we can bring that back the next time. Generally, the departments present once, but we've had departments that have come back to present additional information. I think it would be best to do that during the department presentations instead of up front, because the departments are going to go over what they do, what services they provide, and then as you get that information, then you can kind of decide where you want to go from there. I think that would probably be the best place to do that.
Claudia?
No, go ahead.
Or Chris? if
Well,
you're
I
not
just was
finished.
wondering if we could have some kind of a, whatever council thought would be helpful with your advice. Could there be some kind of a template so it's not just apples and oranges? This department gives us a bottom line, this department gives us 15 pages.
Yeah, it's the same for every, the presentations are literally the same template.
Oh.
They just put their own information in there.
Oh, I thought I heard you say it was different for each.
That's how they manage their budget and what goes into the system. But what we present to you is, for those of you that have been here, it's pretty, it's the same.
Okay.
It's the same. So you're going to see everything the same way for each department, so it's not going to be completely different.
Okay.
Yes.
Claudia?
Could you, since there are people watching, could you define coming in flat?
So coming in flat, it's basically for your operating budget. So we have personnel. There's certain account lines for that. That isn't something that department heads really have they can't change that. That's not something that they can change as a department head. That's a council decision. So they have no control over their personnel budget. So their operating budget is going to be your supplies, your services, anything like that. They have to come in the exact same as what they came in last year. That's what flat is.
But personnel and insurance and the things
Right.
that we don't have any control over, that's the variable that's going
Correct.
to bounce one way or another.
When
So
we do the budget presentations, we have like personnel up at the top and it kind of shows the increase. And then we'll have operating and it should be 0. So you'll see they might have moved things between their lines, but we do a little sum total off to the side and that amount is 0. So you will see that. The other thing they don't really have control over is interfund charges. So, finance, if my personnel goes up by, if insurance goes up by a certain amount, it has to be covered through administrative costs. So, Parks doesn't really have control over that. It's just, it is, they have to pay for that service because they're getting it provided to them.
I did just want to clarify that no department comes in and just presents a bottom line, that we do
Right.
get all the detailed
Right.
budget from every
Right,
department.
I
yeah.
was just, there's some departments.
That's their
that-
technique
Right.
of how they approach budgeting
Yes.
for their purposes, but
Correct.
that's not how they present it to us.
And we used to have more of those in the past. I don't think we really have any. I think most of the department heads pay a lot of attention to the lines. I know that in the past we had that, but
Everyone gives us all their detail, but they're all presented to us in an identical format.
correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can see everything in the same.
And it covers personnel as well as all their operating expenses, as
Yep.
well as if they have seasonal employees,
Yes.
part-time, all of it. Yeah.
Yep. So
Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
okay.
Well, I just want to, because I just want
Yeah,
to make sure that
for
people
sure.
watching understand what that means.
Yes.
That they have to come in, because for different, obviously, words mean different things for different people. And so,
Yeah.
basically, the departments are going to come in, they're going to start at where they were last year.
right. And if we gave them one-time money, that money comes out. So that isn't, their flat is flat to what they're operating. If we gave them $50,000
So it's
for a
strictly
project,
fixed costs.
take it out.
It's not.
Yes.
They don't get to include that.
We're not,
So-
Right.
there's no frills. It's
So-
just fixed expenses.
Yep.
So what's important to also, I think, for people to understand is when we come flat, we mean flat. Any increases, gas goes up, flat is flat.
Yep.
So if you have an increase of your copy or your paper by 2%, you're actually 2% down
Right.
as you're moving through this next year.
Right. So it's flat, but you're right. Technically, it's kind of down because there's always going to be an increase. In
Almost all the costs go up.
Well,
Right.
yeah.
So you are going down if you
Yep.
keep it flat.
Yes, you have to manage that within your budget, and that's kind of what they're doing as they go through.
But if we
those
see something and we know that is there, discussion will happen. If we see, all right, IT has this program and it's going to cost them an extra 25%.
Yep.
That discussion probably happens here because they can't just absorb
Yep.
25%.
Yeah, so the presentations, we kind of go over what the department does so that you have an idea of the services that they provide. Then we go through the budget. We show, the personnel increase, and then we show that they're flat. And then they come in and say, hey, I need an additional $5,000 and it has to be for a specific purpose. So every increase that they ask for, you know exactly what it is for. It is very specific. At that time, you can decide to add it or you can decide to look at it at another time. So our tax solution sheet is really big.
We create a lot of
shows-
lists at
Yes.
that point,
Yeah.
different types
Yeah,
of
for
lists.
sure.
So do we add it, or do we put it on the list? So we go through every department the same way. They have very, very specific requests. They
Or
can't
do we
just-
put it in capital contingency?
Right.
Or there's various different categories that we then start creating
Yep.
wish lists in those categories.
Yep, and we try to be, we try to look at all the different ways that we can fund something if they're bringing it forward. If they need a project, we can say, hey, do we have money in capital for that? Can we use that? So we try to, we all work together during this process to find some creative ways and ways that are going to be the most cost effective for the city.
So, sorry.
Go ahead. In actuality, we put it on 2 or 3 different lists. There's probable, not so probable, and just no.
Yep.
I mean, it gets the discard pile, some of the stuff.
Yeah.
So we really have 3 areas that we go to
Yeah.
with these requests, because it's not fair to keep personnel to keep a department stirred up, making them think we're going to go somewhere that we're
Right.
really not.
You know you're not going to do it. Yep. And so the tax solution list says like anything that affects taxes is in one section, anything that doesn't affect taxes is in another, because those decisions are kind of a little bit easier because you're not increasing the taxes. And so very, very specific lists. Last year I had the council number them from 1 to 10, which was most important. And that way we were able to say, hey, we definitely need this. If something comes in lower, this is what we're keeping. So I think that process worked pretty well.
It did work pretty well. We did know.
Yeah.
But even then, we had a discussion whether one really was one or was really three.
I know.
And we added stuff
And we
at
added
the end
stuff
of
at
it.
the
We
end.
tried.
Yeah.
So we probably need to freeze that to a degree so that we can't just add 10 more things at the end after we've already decided on our priorities. That might be an organizational
Yeah, and that,
clarification.
yeah. And when we get to the tax solution, we generally have, this is the amount that we can add depending on what the council decides they want to do with property taxes at that time.
Sure. Okay.
Anyone else?
Claudia or Chris?
I'm good.
All right.
Good?
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, we also create revenue estimates. Like I said earlier, the departments will come with any fee increases that they think they need to be able to provide the service that they're providing. So any department that has fees is going to talk about their expenses and also their revenues. And so at that point you decide, do we want to include this in the budget? Because we do have to do a separate fee schedule. So department presentations, I've kind of already gone over this. So the department will come and go over their mission statement, their service level report or information, which is basically measures of how they're doing. There's quantitative and qualitative measures, just kind of depending on what the department does. Some of them, like finance, I don't really have numbers that I can give you, but I can say, hey, we did these certain projects during the year. They also go over any issues and concerns at that time that they may have. And budget information is given, and then their requests are analyzed. So this is kind of the presentation format. The issues and concerns can be immediate, or they can be kind of, this is going to come down the road, but they just want the council to be aware of what potentially could happen.
Do individual departments have like annual goals to help focus their efforts? And then when they're talking about either new budgets or reporting on previous budgets, are those at all tied to here's what we set out to achieve this year?
I think
Here's how far we got, therefore we need, or whatever?
Right, I think some departments have those within their departments. What I would honestly recommend is that the council get together as a whole and come up with goals for the city. What I've seen in when I was doing my research to put the budget books together, I saw a lot of cities that had, 5 goals for the council. And then the department would say, hey, we helped with this goal and this is how we did that. Some departments might not, be involved in all of them, but I think it would be a good idea to look. I know that Boise has some really good goals and visions, and they tie everything to
I'm going to
this.
stop you right there because we've got to go on a break. We've got to take a break. I'm
Okay,
sorry, but
you're fine.
we'll remember what you thought if you can.
I'll write it down.
We'll take a break for a few minutes
Okay.
and then we'll get started again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
We'll go ahead and get started again. Thank you very much for joining us after the break. A couple things. Council, as a reminder, our side conversations up here, it's a lot of noise for people at home and in the audience, and so let's try to keep those minimum. And then also, Ashley, I hope you remember where we were. I've got it marked here, issues and concerns are discussed, is what I've got marked.
Well, I had a question ready to go with it. So you were talking about goals and departments setting goals and tying them to a larger
Right.
view. It would be great if we could get there. For example, when we do zoning and planning stuff, we have a plan that we're responding to. And when things come in, they can say it meets goal this and goal that. And we can look at that. And it would really be of great assistance to us if we could get an overstructure by which all the departments were then able to say what goals they think we are meeting by what they're doing. And we don't have that. It's a way of credentialing their requests, or I really think that's something we should go
And
through.
I think most departments have those goals,
Yes.
and so it might just be a matter of
No,
getting.
you don't understand what I'm saying, Brian.
The overall.
I'm saying they all have their independent goals.
Yeah.
Right.
But we need the umbrella that oversees them, because they're not
That was
tied
the
together with a
rest.
structure. The structure needs to be one, just like planning and zoning, where it says there is a city structure that you're trying to serve. That's the only way I think we're going to get to big projects, by having a big plan that we say some of these other things, they serve this tertiary effort over here, but we can't get to some of the big things we want to do because we're always trying to cover the low-level goals of a department, and we can't address a big goal for the city. And that's where I see this overarching thing that we need to do. We need to have what I would say measurable, definable goals of what we really want the city to be doing in 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, just like the comprehensive plan does. And it could be tied to the comprehensive plan, but it's not going to have to address everything in the comprehensive plan, because this is out in other areas too. And that's my,
Yeah, no, and it ultimately needs to come from the council. I know that we do have the new mission and values statements, and those definitely help. But, you know, if we could look at, and I can bring some examples if you guys would like me, like maybe during a working lunch or something, to show you some ideas.
I would like
to give
that.
you some
Okay.
ideas. I would be willing to do that for you, just so you kind of have an idea. But ultimately, you know, you guys need to have some planning sessions, and I know we already kind of just went through this, but maybe to expand on that a little bit, I think would be really beneficial. So
Sure.
that's,
Well, and we have a really, I think, very well-done local example, which is ISU. Heidi, you were there. I don't know if anybody, I was there for their rollout of their strategic plan. And it's tight and it's specific. Even in the one-page summary that we got, it was really clear that they have done a really good job and they know where they're going. And in fact, somewhere in my baggage, I actually have a copy of just their one-page summary because it was so eloquent. I just thought, wow, you know, this would really, if we could be this focused as a council and help our city be this focused as an institution, and it would help, we could tie in with ISU then, and we could find places where we can begin to build really focused, long-term relationships working on goals that are parallel or helping each other reach our individual goals.
So why don't you then, for a working lunch, bring some examples
Okay.
and stuff like that?
Yeah.
We probably are going, because I know ISU is going through that plan right now, that strategic plan right now.
Their plan is done, they're now at implementation stage.
No, their plan has just started to get put together.
Right, but I mean, they've made,
And-
they've
and so-
committed to it, right.
And so they've committed to getting that strategic plan. I'm on that board with
Yeah.
them, and we've had a couple, 3 or 4 meetings. So if you
Right,
you
and
do
I
that, and
mean-
then we'll,
this stuff can be really, really expensive to put really, really detailed, good plans together, but I think that we can work together and put at least something to kind of get us started on the
Sure.
right path, and then, you know, go from there.
Go
But
from there.
yeah, these things aren't cheap to put together, but
Right.
we'll see what we can do.
in many ways, they more than pay for themselves,
Yep.
because you're not creating redundancies that are necessary, and you're not chasing rabbits that should not have been even identified.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Which is true, but as long as we're willing, that we acknowledge and decide that we're going to spend that money, because it's not free, and ISU spends a lot of money
Yes.
to do there.
So let's,
Yes.
if you'll do that.
Yeah, I can do
And
that.
then we will take that next step and find out where
Right.
we're gonna go.
okay.
I'll just mention too that the school district has been doing strategic plans for a number of years.
Yeah.
And so we may be able to tie into some local expertise
Sure.
there without having to pay for, some national consultant from
Right. And
wherever.
like I said, I've been to some long-range planning trainings, and I can bring some of that information as well just to share with you. But ultimately, if you want to get to the, ISU point, the Boise point, you're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
But, we can at least get something started.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so these are the department presentations. I think we've gone through all of that. So here's where the departments are required to build a flat operating budget. So all requests for additional budget authority must be approved by council. Those also include any new positions and any operating increases. So these, like we had mentioned earlier, they are requested during their department presentation, and then at that point the council makes a decision if they want to add it right then or if they want to look at it during the tax solution. So that is your decision to make at that time. And then we solidify the revenues. Like I said, we're going to come with some preliminary numbers, come back to kind of solidify those numbers. And then council decides which department requests will make it to the final budget. That's where we kind of go through that list and say, yes, we want to add this. We make sure that it's balanced according to, all of our estimates. Everything is balanced out. We publish the budget for review, and we also hold public hearings. One of the things we're looking at doing, and I honestly don't know if we'll be able to do it this year, but it has been, we kind of wanted to do maybe a meeting, like a town hall type meeting. I've talked to Logan a little bit. I don't know if we're going to be able to do it this year, but I want you to know that we are looking at doing like some public input for budgeting, whether it's some sort of a quick survey or having a meeting here where they can come and kind of understand what is involved in the budget. That's one of the things that a lot of the government agencies say, that having the public input really helps with those budgets. So, I'm looking at, what other places have done. I want you to know that it's not that it's not out there and we're thinking about it. It's just, getting to that point. But it is something that we've kind of rolled around and thought about doing. So we just kind of need to get that put together. And, I would let you know what would be involved in that. But it was just kind of to get some ideas, and I think when the public has a little bit of input, they feel more of a part of the budget and they can accept it a little bit better because they feel like what they're wanting is getting addressed. So,
Okay.
and then the final budget is adopted by ordinance. So this all happens in August. We do the public hearing the first meeting in August, and then we do the ordinance the second meeting in August. We are required to send the property tax information to the counties, usually the first week of September. So that's kind of why we do everything in August, so that we have all those numbers ready to be sent to the county. And then our budget year actually begins October 1st.
When's the L2 due?
I believe it's the first Friday in September. I need to double check the timeline. That's why I just put the first week. Because I didn't have the exact date. But I think last year was like September 6th or 7th.
And didn't last year we got our numbers from the county very late, after these things were due? So
Yeah.
we had to estimate?
So generally we publish in July because you have to leave that 2 weeks before the public hearing. And then we did have that special meeting in August where we had some better numbers as far as new construction and some valuation numbers, but we're not required to get those until the 1st of August. I think it's the first Monday or Tuesday.
And then ultimately they changed
They do
again later?
Yes.
Yeah.
Operating property is evaluated by the state, and that isn't actually done until like September. So they'll change a little bit, but we'll have a pretty good handle of where we're going to be at that time.
So Ashley, let's run through that timeline again, if we could. So we have to have the L2 to the state the first week of September.
Yep, correct.
In order to get the L2, what do we need?
We have to have a past budget. We need to know what we're asking for property tax.
So we need to have a passed,
So we need to have the budget ordinance adopted.
okay, ordinance adopted,
Last meeting of August.
and that is when?
Second meeting of August.
Third week in August,
Yes.
okay. And in order to do that, we have to have a meeting.
Public hearing.
The public hearing 2 weeks ahead of that.
Correct.
So our public hearing has to be the first week of August.
Yep. And you have to publish for your
Notice,
public
yeah.
hearing 2 weeks ahead of that. So usually the middle of July.
So published middle of July.
Yep. So we have to have a pretty good idea of what we want. Once we publish that budget, we cannot go any higher. We can drop it. So I know last year we went as high as we could, just based on, you know, what the numbers that we had, and then we can always decrease it, but we cannot increase it at that point.
So last year we published taking 3% tax.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, what was that we ended up taking?
We estimated to take the full 3%, but it didn't end up, I'd have to check the numbers on that to what we actually took. But we did estimate to take almost the full 3%.
Yeah, and then that number dropped, if I remember right, to like 2 point.
I'd have to look.
1.6, 1.9. I
I was
can't
thinking it was
remember.
1 point something, or I think it was close to 2.
I guess it doesn't matter. I mean, we publish high, and we always publish high. That 3%.
Because you can't
Because
go
we don't
higher.
know what those numbers are.
Right.
We have to publish a budget before this county, by statute, has to give us the actual numbers.
Yes. Yes.
So they have to give us the actual numbers sometime in
It's
July, in August.
The first week of August. Is
The
when
first,
there's-
that's when they're supposed to give us those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
The first week of August. So theoretically, we could have our public hearing August 1.
And we did last year.
And we
had our
did
public
last
hearing,
year.
before.
Before we had any idea what those actual numbers are.
Correct.
So we are budgeting on an unknown.
Yep. And there's really, I mean, it's all state mandated. It's not the greatest way, but it's kind of
It's a
the way that
horrible way
we're
to
forced to
budget.
do it.
Yeah, but we don't
Let's
have
put a
choice.
budget together, we don't know what we have.
There's no-
But-
yeah.
But I think we can extrapolate better than we do, because we know what our building valuations have been for building permits, and we can look at a history and see what's come in after that history has been established. And we can kind of know, based on what the county did after the fact of our building permits, and we can probably come up with a ratio. It's not going to be exact, but it probably would be more exact than guessing.
And that's what we do.
Well, new
Is that-
construction, that would most of that would be new construction.
Mm-hmm.
Usually what we do is we just say that the valuation remains flat, honestly. So,
But that's where we got the benefit last year, was because new construction came in at a higher rate. And I think those rates can be ascertained to a better degree by extrapolating what we've done with our building
Yeah.
permits, and we can go back over several years of what the value has been, and we can find what the ratio that comes in to us is. And it might be, there's a way to figure that out.
and we can look at that.
Don't we typically just figure 20 million?
20 million is the
in,
average
New construction's
new
average.
construction.
So-
And I do present the information of like the previous new construction so that you can kind of see where we've been. It goes higher when we have TIF districts that come on the tax rolls. So last year we did have the North Yellowstone TIF district close. So we got an extra, that was like 63 million. So generally we're around 20 million, but we can definitely look and see if we can get closer. As far as the 3%, that's already known, and I have it in here, so we can go over that. But we don't really know what it's. I'll just go.
Well, and
Sorry.
there ought to be some information that the assessor's office can give us that isn't the exact assessment, but we can find out if values are holding, if values are going up. We should know whether the commissioners, because they have a deadline, we should know whether the commissioners are going to do a blanket 10% reduction on 3,000 units. We should be able to extrapolate that too.
When is those appeals, when are they due?
I want to say they still have hearings through July, the second week of July. They have hearings, and that's why they have a couple weeks to get us those numbers. We were able to get the numbers in the past, and then they came in, the estimates weren't really close to what we had, and so they really don't like to give us estimates anymore.
Well, I'm going to go on record that if you've done the majority of your work before July, you should be able to present the majority of your work to us.
I think the danger comes, we're in a really good economic cycle, but across the state, there's much talk that this isn't going to last forever. You get in this, but if you get in that mindset, the day is coming when these valuations are going to drop. It's going to happen.
But
as we build out and more homes become available, the pressure on residential is going to go down.
But you will know that as well by what the trend that they have done, because, and I don't want to go way into it, but they knew in January last year, after doing a percentage of their assessments, that they were going up, and they could have shared that information. And if they know in January that things are going down, they can share that information. You know, I mean, it's not out there like it's, there are records out there that we can seek, and we can see trend lines. And we don't have to go off of a Ouija board, we can go off of trend lines.
But we have no way of getting that. If the assessor's office doesn't provide that, we have no way of putting pressure on to get that information.
This is the same conversation we've had this like for the past few years.
Well,
the
yeah.
same exact.
I know we've had it for
Yeah.
11 years.
Yeah, I mean, we would all love it, and we would gladly accept whatever the assessor's office would give us. But if they don't give it to us,
Well,
they
we
don't
can
give
talk
it to
to
us,
private,
right?
we can talk to private, if we want. There are private assessors that can tell us what is happening in the assessments. They can tell us, and then the public assessor's office has to pay some attention to what is going on in the private sector. They can't do it out of the blue. So we can find out from private assessors whether the trend is up or down. And Jim was telling us all along for years where things were headed, and the assessor just caught up with it.
But ultimately, that only affects your levy rate, which is what I was going to kind of go over here. The amount that we take in property taxes is the amount that we take. The levy rate, we have no control over. It's all depends on valuations. So that's kind of, I mean, the way that we've looked at it in the past is it's really, really hard if you're only looking at the levy rate. You need to look at the dollar amount because we have no control over that levy rate.
Well, but we do have control over it because the amount we take is what sets the levy rate.
Right, but if valuations are higher.
I know, but if we know.
Yeah.
We're a small piece of that, though.
But it's a part of the formula. You can't throw our part of it out and get to the formula. I mean, if it's an integral part of the formula, then it is something that needs to be considered. And we have influence on that.
But ultimately, the value of the properties is what is going to dictate what that levy rate looks like. But you're right. I mean, you have to have all of it to do the job. What would be interesting, and I'll just go on record, if we're going to go on record, Roger, what I would go on record on is saying legislators stop messing with the caps and all that stuff. Let's change dates so that we can really know what we have so that we can actually build a budget that makes sense so we're not guessing.
Well, theoretically, their year begins with our year. And so a lot of the assessments could be made in the October period to January instead of, they could be coming out 3 months in advance. It's just a matter of the expectation placed on them.
Well, and it's also a matter of that the legislature sets this schedule. Those dates are dictated by law, so ultimately we need them to push that back so that we can have that information.
We need that. Anyway, we've gone into the weeds enough on that one. Let's continue on.
Okay, we're going to go over a little bit about property taxes. So the levy rate calculation is the amount to be levied divided by the assessed taxable value. So the city controls the amount, dollar amount, and the county determines the value. So like you said, we have a little part of that, but a lot of it is unknown to us. The legislators determine the tax exemption values, and they also create impacting property tax laws, which is kind of what we're dealing with right now. I haven't heard anything new on any of those. I don't know if anyone else has, but I think that they're still,
They're in the discussion on the freeze
Right.
that passed.
We heard about that this morning, and it's still being discussed, but they're kind of at an impasse. So it's not really known what's going to go. They were saying that, in terms of the two parts like whether we could take new construction or what was the other?
So I think it's the new
and-
construction was part of the 3%.
Yeah, but what they're considering in the legislature was letting us possibly have new construction, but there were two factors, and I'm blanking on the other one, and they said we couldn't have, they didn't want to give us both. They would give us one. And they were looking, new construction was probably the bigger of the two, so that was the one they might let us have. But that was where the discussion was as of this morning, when we heard from Jim Guthrie.
So it's still an unknown.
Yes.
Still unknown.
But aren't they, didn't I read somewhere that the legislature has, I'm not sure if it's 100% passed or it's 2/3 of the way to the gate, but to create some kind of interim study committee, which, to look at the whole tax situation.
Senate resolution.
That's a Senate
Yeah.
concurrent resolution.
But I thought the House, I thought the House, either a committee or had also agreed to it. At any rate, it sounded hopeful in the sense that they might be creating an opportunity to actually do some careful input and study. So I had my fingers crossed when I read that.
Was that on property tax or sales tax?
It was on property tax relief.
Okay.
And they are, I don't think it's fully passed yet,
No.
but I mean, it resolved, I should say. It's a resolution. But that, they're looking at that, yes.
Okay. And then one of the things that we've learned through all of our budget training is to maintain consistent services, entities should focus on the amount to be levied instead of the levy rate, which I kind of mentioned earlier. So the property tax review, the 3% allows for an increase in property taxes of 3%. As of right now, that amount for fiscal year 21 would be $939,327. So we kind of already have that 3% amount. We also do have foregone balance. So the foregone balance, in case you don't know, is kind of, we could have taken the amount, we didn't. So they put it into a little account that's called foregone. We can take that foregone balance. We have to do its own separate publication and public hearing, but it does affect the levy rate.
And how long, I mean, can you go back to 1896 or?
I don't know how far that goes back. It's quite a ways.
When they passed the law that you could only take the 3% property tax, they put in opportunity, the foregone balance. If you did not take it, you could do the saving.
But in
have it a
perpetuity, so
Yeah.
100 years from now, they could come back to this year.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
although
Theoretically.
Yes.
theoretically, although legislation right now is looking to
Right.
take it
Understood.
out.
Yeah,
But
they're
I'm
trying
just
to
trying to
punish the
understand.
people that had used the restraint they suggested you should use.
That's right.
I mean, that's about
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah,
So-
they're looking at that too.
New construction for tax year 19, which would be fiscal year 20, was the 87 million. That, like I said, is generally around 20. So it's because that TIF.
When we're looking at the trends that Roger's talking about, we will definitely see a spike.
Yes,
and that will be able
there's
to
an
be explained
explanation.
of
Yes.
what happened. Okay.
Yep, and the general amount. So last year we got 869,000 in new construction. Normally we budget about 200 to 250,000 in new construction. We also have levy limitations that are state mandated as well. So I'm not going to go over all of these, but we can only take up to a certain percentage for most of our funds. Street fund has no limit, animal shelter has, or the bond has no limit, and then the liability insurance or like a tort fund doesn't have a limit. But you are limited, so like the general fund has an available amount of about 6.5 million. We can't take all that in a year because of the 3%. But this is just saying, you know, we don't want to be right up against that limit. So this slide just kind of shows how much room we have. The one that we're kind of at the most right now is the capital improvement fund, but that one we're just starting to build. So that is a 0.0004%. So I just kind of put on here the levy limit and then the amount that is available just for you to review. We're looking at it, we're in a very healthy position in all of our funds. So I really don't see any issues with those levy limitations. We've worked really, really hard. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we were at like .0089 in the general fund, we were like right up against it. So we've, tried to, the capital improvement fund has helped with that. We've moved some things around to try to alleviate that stress on the general fund. So that is really all that I had on that. We will be bringing back some more next week to present to you, like the reserve, what we have in reserves for certain funds and things like that. I had a list, I left it on my desk. So, yeah, we will be going over those, and I'll work with Ruth on the agenda so that you can kind of have an idea of what we're going to go over next week.
And I know you've been really busy with all of this, and thank you for doing all of this. And I was wondering if we'll be able to get, for example, all the departments and so forth, the funds, and then get some kind of a thumbnail, like which ones are made up of local, state, federal, which ones might be, all property tax, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So we can begin to see which departments are most reliant on which types of funds.
And we could possibly add that to the budget slides, the department presentations, because I do have the majority of that information, if that would be helpful.
That might be a good idea.
That way, as they're presenting, you can say, this is what we do and this is how we do it. That we could definitely add that as a slide.
And
That's
could
good
you
time.
compile those too on like, so we're not having to go from this presentation paperwork to this, but we have whatever the departments come with on 2 sheets so that we can begin to get a framework, as I can begin to create a framework in my head.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Are there any other
I think
questions?
that's a good point, because a lot of times when we say we're going to go ahead and cut, let's cut X amount of dollars out of this, we're really cutting $10 of tax dollars, but we're saying we're not going to take $200,000 of federal dollars. And stuff.
Right, yeah, we
That's a
can
good idea.
put that together as part of the department presentations and on a separate sheet.
Thank you.
That's I like
Can you go
that.
back to your previous slide just for?
Yep.
So we don't have that slide with the numbers. We have that slide with.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was working on this last night and I didn't have these numbers at my house.
Okay.
So I put them in this morning. If you guys want, we're going to post this for the website, but if you need to write any of them down,
Okay, Heidi's
or
got them.
I got it.
I can email them too if you want me to. Just let me
That'd
know.
be best.
Want me to email them? I was going to email them to department heads too, so.
It'll be in the budget
Yep.
section too.
Yep, and it'll be on the website, but I can email those out. Yes,
Okay.
they are missing those because Ruth printed them out for me. She's so nice. Are there any other questions?
Okay, seeing none, then we will move to agenda item 4, City Council Budget Policy Discussion. City Council will discuss the city's budget policies for fiscal year 2021. So, Council, is there anything that, policy-wise, that you would like, as the department heads are developing their budget, to be focused on and looking at?
I'm going to start out. It's been over 20 years since the council has done a deep dive into the budget. We've taken, and that precedes me, by the way. But I know I'm not advocating going line item by line item, but I think we have to get down farther than what we've done in previous years, because it's a cursory overview that we get. And it would be nice to know how things have changed. When I did just a overview of what we are collecting, I went back as far as we could on the internet with what's available there. But we've had some huge growth in some departments. The inflation rate's 17.25% over that span. But we've got departments that our allocations are up 273%, 55, 60, 60, 40, 48, for example. There's others that come in. I'm just saying that, to me, that warrants doing a deeper dive to see how we got to where we have these numbers there. And they may be well justified, I don't know, but that's our job, is to figure out how we got there. And to have our budget come in without doing that deeper dive on our part, I don't think that's what people put us here to do. I think they put us here to be the dialogue factor with our departments and to empower our departments to articulate why they're doing what they're doing and why we expended in this area, and maybe not be able to defend why we've expended in some areas. So I really think that's an important factor for us in our deal. So I'm starting the discussion with that observation.
I think that's good. I think part of that, though, we need to also recognize and look at the way the city over that 20 years has evolved. For example, you didn't used to have a building department.
No.
In 2009, Mayor Chase said, we're making a building department, and that was outside of the budgeting process. He plopped that in there, and so we're going to have to be able to look at how and what kind of personnel. I know that there was, I know code enforcement went from one department to the other, and so those are the things that we'll have to probably be able to figure out when we're doing that deep dive. So, yeah.
But that's what we all need to own. I mean, we need to know what's transferred, why we got to certain places. I think there was only, the non-departmental had the greatest decrease, 17%.
Decrease?
Yes.
I think that we had moved some things out to, I know that we used to do capital contingency in there, and we moved
Well,
that
I'm
to a
just saying
separate
that
fund.
just on what you can pick up off of what's noted as in departments, 2011-12 and 2019-20, you can do the comparisons, and these are the ways they compare, and so not knowing what was there in some things, because it precludes all of us in some ways. We have to get to knowing what we own as the operation of the city.
So that's interesting. I mean, it's something to look at with that non-departmental. I wonder if that retirement policy that we put in has anything to do with that.
Well, but those are the explanations that we need.
For us to look at. Yeah.
So, it's just a way of, and it's not the only way to look at it, but it's a way of starting to do our study of our departments.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just being new to this, could you help me understand what exactly you mean by what are the council's budgeting policies? What does that word in this context mean, policy?
Well, you and Claudia actually requested that we have a budgeting policy discussion before we got into the middle of budgeting, and so you would be able to answer that for me better than I could, quite frankly.
So then, what we were talking about was talking about establishing a concrete process, some of which we've talked about, having departmental goals, comparing increase rates over years. But also, we had questions around when council is not in this kind of situation, but when we're having discussions, are we going to run those discussions, for example, based on some version of Robert's rules, so it's really clear, what we are deciding and, when we're discussing toward a decision and, those kinds of things. I mean, that's what we were talking about, defining the council's role in a policy way so that we understand where, when, and how different kinds of input that we might have can be put on the table. So that's what we were talking about. And it doesn't seem as though this is probably the format for that. But then, then, I mean.
What would be the format then?
Well,
Where would
I don't know. You're the guy who can put stuff on the agenda and determine what the meetings, different kinds of meetings look like. So if we want to have that discussion, I guess I would say we probably, since Claudia was 50% of that request, we probably should wait until Claudia can be present to represent herself. But I don't even know, for example, if that is a place where we need to have all these folks sitting, or we have that discussion in a study session, and then in a more public session like this, we say, okay, here's how our process is going to work.
Okay, so.
And I don't know that because I have no more information than I have.
So,
I'm confused about what is the request.
I know there was a request to put this on a city council agenda so that we could have this discussion, and so we did that.
Right.
And so I've asked the department heads to be here so that because it directly affects the department heads on how they present the budget. They want to make sure that they're presenting the way the council's looking, and so.
Okay, then I would like to see what it would look like for every department, and I'll say every just to make it uniform, were to reduce by 10%. And what I would like to see is not only the bottom line and where money would have to exit in order to achieve that 10%, but what potential impact on the public might that create, and then given the definition of that impact, in what ways, other than adding the money back into the budget, might that impact be mitigated?
Okay. Is that something that the council's interested in, and departments coming with a 10% reduction? And
I'm not.
I don't think that's
That's slash
possible.
and burn, that's not planning.
I don't think that's possible. Costs go up. There are services that we have to provide. I mean, you saw in the presentation, the biggest part of our budget, over half of it, is wages.
is that Claudia? Good, Claudia.
I don't see how you can slash wages by 10%.
And I'm not asking that. It's the same thing that, school districts do routinely, is say to individual schools, if you had to reduce your budget by 10%, how would you do that? And the reason they would ask me, as opposed to imposing it on the outside, is because I'm the person who knows that building from the inside out. And so I'm not saying that even has to be possible, but if we don't even make that attempt, then we've essentially just acquiesced to the fact that there are no reductions, there are no, in any department that can possibly be made.
Well, and
Period.
ISU does the same thing. Ask departments, how would you cut your budget?
Right.
But 10% is a huge cut. We usually looked at 2 to 5%.
Okay, let's say 5.
I think 10% is a number that is just simply not possible, so why would we go through that exercise?
Right, and when it comes to numbers, I basically, I don't like to think things aren't possible or are possible. I like to know on the numbers. But I'm very willing, if 5% is more reasonable, I'm very willing to take your advice and say, okay, let's go for 5%.
Well, I didn't say let's go for 5%. I said that's kind of the things that we've looked at ISU. I would be more comfortable if we're going to go through this exercise with something like 2. But I'm not sure.
So,
I'd like to
Claudia,
push
let me just tell you where we are. We're at the city council budgeting policy discussion.
Okay.
And so that's where we are and what we're doing. And the question is really truly, what policies does the council want to see coming forward? Now, I did not hear, though, Chris, you say everybody come in with a budget cut of 10%. I heard, maybe I'm reading between the lines that I shouldn't be reading, but I heard we're bringing people to the table at a flat budget. You just want to know what it would look like if,
Right.
what services would we be cutting or would be on the chopping block that the city council
Yeah.
would have to decide
Oh, of
what
course.
Yeah, and
that looks like.
what I-
Not come and cut
That's
your
what I'm
budget.
hearing. Yeah, no, that's what
Yeah.
I'm hearing
Okay, I
too.
just
I'm
wanted to be
just
clear.
an exercise.
Yeah.
Just the way I would with my household budget, if, I said, okay, what would I actually have to give up, in order to start setting aside money for a new roof in 5 years? What would I actually have to do? And if I reduce my household budget by 5%, 10%, what would that look like? What would I have to give up? Would I have to eat, rice and canned beans for 5 years or what?
But I want to be clear, though, you're not asking departments to come in and say, these are the services that I would cut. You're asking them what would be affected, and then the council, because really, truly, that is not a department head discussion, because we're the ones that get blasted.
Oh,
when
right.
But you're
something's cut.
asking
We've
them
gotta-
to show us how they would.
Right, because
cut
they're the
10%. Right.
experts. They're the experts.
They would have to show, we would make the decision as to whether we would do that or
Right.
not, but they would show us if we did require that, how they would get there.
Right.
So they're the ones recommending what they would cut.
But they're not necessarily having to recommend it. They can say, well, here is option A, B, or
Right,
C that I
right,
would do to cut, but
I don't
this
mean
is gonna be
recommending,
the-
they're
yeah,
showing
this would
us
be
what
the
they would cut.
ramifications,
Right,
you know,
because they know.
This would be the ramification.
Yeah.
Roger, you were going to say
What I hear and what Chris is asking is that if you were asked as a department to reconfigure your department, which business does that all the time, everybody does it all the time. If you were asked to reconfigure and the number she gives us, if you were asked to reconfigure your department to get to the essentials that you think you are called upon to deliver, and to get to a 10% reduction, what would it look like? And it's nothing more than presenting what it would
It's an
look like
exercise.
to us, so that we then have the information necessary to say, okay, this seems reasonable, this doesn't seem reasonable. We don't want it on you, it's on us. And so then we're in a position to say whether we're going to harvest what they've identified or not. That's all I'm hearing. I don't hear it as a huge immediate 10% reduction in overall budget. I hear it as a tool to perhaps look at the budget more stringently.
And I hear exactly what you're saying. I don't, even to go through the exercise, I would not be comfortable with 10%.
Okay, so this is what worries.
Why not?
This is going to be what's worrisome to me. We went through this process and we cut 2% of the budgets, and it was devastating. I don't think we've come completely out of that yet. When we lost that lawsuit, and we just barely were able to, in fact, we're in the process right now of paying writing those checks out still right now. And that was extremely painful. What worries me is when we did the 2%, morale in the city went from here to here immediately, because people start questioning, okay, am I going to have a job? Am I not going to have a job? Are we going to do this service? Are we not going to do this service? And so I think it's a dangerous exercise.
Well,
I'm not saying don't do it. I'm thinking I think it's dangerous.
But the alternative is to say that we as our city, we will never ask ourselves to look at really what would it look like. Because in some departments, especially depending on, which is why this schema of, if a department gets 90% of its funds from the feds, then asking that department to reduce by 10% would be probably doing exactly what you mentioned previously, Brian, that we would be turning away free money. So obviously, that wouldn't, that wouldn't probably wouldn't be smart. But I believe that it is equitable to ask our city to tighten its belt, or what it would look like. The same way, every time we ask more money from our taxpayers, we are asking them to do exactly what I'm suggesting, to say, where out of my budget is that extra $2,000 gonna come from? So all I'm really asking for is for all of us who comprise this city, those of us who work within our departments and our citizens, to go through the same exercise, because our citizens are already going through that exercise and have been doing it, but especially obviously this last year.
And not by choice.
So that's all I'm asking, because we don't know. Sometimes if you reconfigure, you can actually cut dollars without tragically impacting services. But we don't usually arrive at those conclusions unless we're asked to go through that exercise.
And I think that doing this would be a good opportunity for all the department heads to make sure that they are running as lean as they can be, that there is no duplication, that there is no, 8 people doing the job of 1 over here, and then you've got 1 person doing the job of 8 over there in that department. It's just another way of making sure that every department is being as efficient as they could possibly be. But without going through the process, we're never going to know that. We're never going to know.
I think that, yeah.
We'll go ahead
Go
and
ahead.
answer my question. So your point is well taken about the morale and about people being concerned about this, and I understand the sentiment about, it being a slash or something like that. I would hope that, I'm glad we're having this conversation now, because I think it's better to at least be able to look at it instead of blindsiding someone when they come for their department presentation.
Right.
Okay, so that's all I'm going to say, and I would hope that staff in the room would not take it as we think you're doing a terrible job and
No.
you're super inefficient and we're going to get to the bottom of it. Like, the way I'm looking at it is, this may just be a way for the departments to come and say, here's what it is. If we were to actually reduce, this is what would happen. And then the public, if they want to watch the meetings and weigh in, and we have some, then they can understand a little bit better what that means. Because I think there is a little bit of a public sentiment of, and it's probably because of the federal government, but people think they're like golden toilets, or you know what I mean? And there aren't.
They're not being kept.
Yeah, there aren't in the city of Pocatello. That's what I can tell you. There aren't. And so I think it would just be at least helpful to be able to say, this is what it would be. This is, because like we saw at the town hall meeting,
Right, exactly.
we had somebody say, you got to cut, and then immediately we had like 5 other requests
For new
increase.
things.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think just helping people understand what that is,
Yeah.
I think would be okay. And I would hope that the departments wouldn't take it as like, we're coming for something.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But I
yeah.
just think it would be an okay exercise to do. And what the percent is, I don't know. I don't,
And that's what I was saying. I was not objecting to an exercise of how it would look, and we're always looking at how we can save money and do things more efficiently. I think that's part of our process every year, and so I'm not objecting to that at all. I think 10% is
still a lot.
So hold on, everybody, hold on. Roger has something to say.
Well, one of the things I think, when we weigh in and say this is a request by council, we're empowering department people to to know that they are empowered to look with some scrutiny too. Because bureaucracy always has some places where they know they shouldn't be spending. I mean, that's just the nature of bureaucracy. There is a place, there is a thing we're doing, and it might be that they can divulge that under this where they're not going to give it up because it's somebody's sacred cow or something like that. And it gives some permission to say, if I had to identify what I think is antiquated in our department, what I think is inefficient in our department, it gives us the opportunity to ask our people, and I really believe most of our people have been looking in depth, but at the same time, they've not had the permission to say, there's some changes that need to be made, and I need to be empowered to make those changes at the same time, because there are things that have happened in our society that have precluded the use of some things and have promoted the use of other things. That's the changing society. We're just asking, if you were to look at where you would cut some or reallocate resources, let us know. That's all I think this is. And I may think 10% is pretty hefty, but 5%, if I would go for that. Tell us because some of these departments, 5% of a $14 million budget or $16 million budget is a lot of money. So I would, and it's not putting it in stone that that's what we're going to harvest. It's just going to help us to identify where we may harvest.
Well, and I think and I'm fine with 5%. I mean, I'm absolutely fine to acquiesce to the wisdom of people who are more experienced in this process than I am. I think what is also actually the most important part of the three parts that I outlined is what would the impact to the public be? Because our city exists to serve the public, therefore, I think when people are responding to the request I'm making, that it's important to look at it from the impact on the public. And then I also think it is important to go that next step and say, now that I've got that impact identified, is there any other way that I can mitigate it, that I can reduce it from horrific to really not a big deal by doing something creative? Because frequently there is.
And one more comment on this, or at least one more for me. I don't know if it's the last one, but I think this is absolutely something we should look at if there are ways we can save, but I do want to just reiterate that is something we do as part of our process every year, and emphasize that I think all of our department heads are constantly looking for ways to save us money and to be creative. Because one thing that Ashley pointed out in the budget, the first part, the budgeting basics, was that coming in flat is actually coming in lower because costs go up all the time. So I know in my conversations with, and I'll use Tom with the street department, an example, because coming in flat actually means doing with less, they have to come up with creative ways to do with less every year, and even come up with ways to do more with less. So I just want to emphasize that process is and has been happening, and absolutely should continue. But they do that, so.
Well, and and my reason for bringing it up, frankly, is exactly what Heidi was talking about, is the last thing that I want to do to one of my colleagues who works in a department is to have them sitting there and say, because I don't know, I would not have been able to answer that. If I were just sitting there and somebody said, hey, Chris, if you were going to reduce your budget by 5%, what would it look like? I'd be, may I get back with you after I've had a moment to think? And I don't, I have no desire to ever put someone in that position. I want to give them the time that they need to configure that consideration in whatever way works best for them, so that they have control of their comfort zone to the greatest degree possible.
And then I just want to say something that I know is going to be not popular. But as Roger said, private corporations restructure all the time. It's something that they're constantly looking at because it is part of efficiency. And working for a municipal corporation shouldn't insulate anybody from that possibility, because we have an obligation to the people who pay these bills to make sure. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, I'm excited that Tom's going to get rid of 5 people, and that's not what I'm saying. That, to me, I don't want to see anybody have to go. But I also don't believe that anybody is insulated from that, because if private companies do it because it increases the bottom line, then we owe it to the taxpayers to at least look at, as part of this process, what that, if your department is personnel heavy, then that might be something that has to be looked at. So, and I know that that's not popular wherever the camera is, but.
Could I comment on that?
Sure.
Just one quick comment. I don't disagree that, we always have an obligation to be as responsible as we can with taxpayer dollars. That is our number one thing that we do, or reason for being, is we are stewards of taxpayer money, and we need to do that as responsibly as we can. And so every year at this time, when we go through this process, we need to do that as carefully and as conscientiously as we can. But I would make one point here. Government and the way that we do budgeting is very different than private corporations, and we are bound by many, by state law, by all sorts of rules that make it very different.
Well, and I understand that
just making that point.
And I understand that there's a difference between a municipal corporation and a private corporation, but my point is simple. Nobody who works for a city, a county, a state, or the federal government should feel that because they work for one of those 4 entities, that they are insulated and protected where the rest of the world is not. So that's the only thing I'm saying. So, my husband works for the government. He's not, he's not protected. He's not insulated. Things happen. I know, but I've had many friends, executive vice presidents, lose their jobs at 45 years old. So nobody is protected, and I just want to, I'm saying it out loud because it's a fact.
Well, and we're presuming in some of the discussion today that the cuts will be personnel, and I don't think they have to be.
Right.
And we may have somebody that is still using a hammer and nails when they shouldn't be using it, and they refuse to move on. I don't know that, but it might be that department where somebody is not using electric tools and stuff and they won't change, then that something needs to be happening there. But I really think what we're asking is show us the areas in which savings may be reaped. We're putting it in your lap to do that. We're asking you with your due diligence, with the command of the department you have, to tell us where you think, if there were savings to be garnered, they would come. That's all we're asking. And we're not saying we're going to take 5%. We're just saying that that's a target area to frame things. It's not I don't think this is a real thrust on any individual. It's just it's a diving a little deeper than we've gone in a few years and saying, okay, where are we able with this deeper look to perhaps find some savings
So
or efficiency?
I'm wondering if we're going to do an exercise. I wonder if an exercise for us to do wouldn't be show us the savings that you're providing with the dollars that we've given you.
Well, that's not already part of their presentation, though?
It is.
I mean, I would think that
But to make that very clear.
I don't think they make it clear. We're saying, come to us and we're down to 5% now, cut what a budget looks like if it's 5%. I'm still saying, come flat, and if you want to go through an exercise of what does it look like what would have to be cut if you were to cut 5%, what does that look like so the council can decide what's cut? I'd be interested to know what they're already doing that's innovative to do and have what we have as a city. For example, I know we get compared to Idaho Falls an awful lot. And Idaho Falls has $100 million a year budget higher than our budget. But yet we do a lot of things. In fact, I think we do more things, and I think we do more things better than Idaho Falls has ever thought of. For example, Idaho Falls has asked for a glass recycling program. Well, we have one. They don't know how to put it together. We haven't increased our budget for that, but we've got that. Idaho Falls walked away from their recycling program. We've decided to keep doing the recycling program. Idaho Falls, mind you, has $100 million more than we have, but they're making those decisions like that, and we're figuring out how to make it work. So I think our people and departments, I would be interested to see how much money they're saving us in the efficiencies that they're getting, if that makes any sense to me.
I think that
instead of going cut it, how are we saving? I mean, that's a big deal.
So that was actually an idea that I had, and it may be a silly idea, but it would actually, I think, be helpful to the council and maybe to some of the public who's watching the meetings, if we could have just a quick one slide. This is how much our police department budget is. This is how much Idaho Falls Police Department is. This is how much Twin Falls is. Just the Twin Falls and Idaho Falls. And it's just there, and that's what it is, and we have that, and we can look at it. Because I think we'll be under, like you said, in a lot of areas.
But I don't know if totals would always be under, because you might not be comparing apples to apples in that. You know, if you just give a total budget, I don't know if that makes...
If it seems like when the department looks at that, if that's going to prompt a question, then they can explain to us why. Because I know, like I see Eric nodding, because Idaho Falls has a very different situation in their library than we do. So I think there will be some situations where it will be different.
And I wanted to ask a point of clarification here. The exercise that we're requesting, if we're asking departments, and now we've come to 5%, I still want to go back to 2, but anyway, whatever we decide on that, my understanding is we're asking them to present that in addition to asking them to present the flat budget, so that we see both.
Right.
We're not asking them to only do that. Is that correct?
No,
Okay.
that's exactly right.
So we could ask for some different scenarios, but we'll still see the flat budget. But then I would add, and maybe it's part of the flat budget discussion, because that is kind of where they're at now. I mean, keeping it flat, but actually, as we've said, that's really going down. But highlight, and I think they do, but maybe make it clearer, highlight the ways in which they have been creative or saved money or come up with ways to do more for less, you know, so that we can really see those as part of that flat budget.
And you know, and to your point, and to Roger's actually too, you know, these are different times than it was even last year, 2 years ago, when you went through this process, because people saw 40-50% increases in what they're paying in property taxes. So that's a huge. Now I'm not saying that the levy rate. I'm just saying that people saw 40 to 50% increases. The assessors gearing up.
Not in taxes.
Yes, in taxes.
In taxes.
You don't
That's not
understand.
an average, though.
That might just be
40%.
That's very rare.
Not on average.
Not on average, but 40.
That's a
people did
very
see
rare
40%
situation.
Not in the
increases.
Highland area.
But my point is that we do need to we do 2% might have been painful then, but you know, people are suffering now. So I feel we are obligated to look at more than just 2%, because people didn't get asked, people got told, cinch your belt. And the assessor's gearing up for a whole nother assessment. So everybody's already panicking over what it's gonna be. Now I get it, property values are what they are, but I think it is our obligation to try to come in as absolutely as lean as we could possibly come in.
And
That's always
I just want to be clear. We are, and I'm confident, but I think it's worthy of a look. But I am confident that we're extremely lean as a city. If we were to compare, I mean, you pick the cities, you compare a finance department with Twin Falls or Idaho Falls, the personnel is, they've got more personnel than we do. We do more with what we've got. And so I think that the efficiencies is what I'm really interested in. Where are we doing that? But I think it's hard. I think it's hard. I'm looking at Heather right now because I know I've asked her to kind of get some comparisons, and I know she's been working night and day for a few months trying to get this information for us so that we will have a comparison. So
Could I just, I feel as though we've kind of gone to another point now, is how do we stack up against others? And that is not where I started, was a suggestion for a way to begin to find a different way to understand the budget. And it really, to a large degree, is motivated by what Heidi is talking about. If the public understands, because 5% doesn't sound like very much to most people. I mean, if you're just thinking, oh, 5%, well, that doesn't sound like, I mean, it's less than our sales tax, right? So, but if the public understands that a 5% cut to Department X means that something that they clearly aren't going to be happy with happens to them,
None of their potholes can be fixed.
then it helps make it real and helps them understand and not get into this adversarial view of them, the city, versus us. It helps them say, oh my gosh, that would be it. Whatever I would lose costs a lot of money, but you know what? It's worth it to me. So now I might still be saying, dang, I wish my taxes weren't going up, but I'm not saying that darn city there doing this. And I think for a community, I think it's worth doing that. I think coming together as a community rather than
Us be them.
us and theming is worth the effort. And I think it actually does demonstrate and will demonstrate that exactly what you've been alluding to, Brian. So I think it also helps demonstrate, and Linda, helps demonstrate how critical what our departments are in fact doing. And there is no shame. I mean, if somebody said to me, you know what, Chris, you could get along with one less playground supervisor if you just moved lunch by 5 minutes, and I hadn't thought of that, it didn't make me a bad person. It didn't mean I was trying to, rip anybody off. It just meant that somebody on the team was able to help me save the team $50, which for school was a lot of money.
Okay, Roger.
I really think what we're talking about, when we talk about budget, we're talking about an avenue to create one data point. And that's what would it look like if departments projected to us a 5%. That's one data point. Another data point is how we compare to other cities. Another data point is how our salaries compare to other cities. Another data point would be how much money we have available to us. And I think another data point would be what do we want to do anticipating where the levy might go. These are all data points that we have to take in and process and make a judgment on. We're gathering information. We're asking for information in two forms. One, flat budget, right now 5%. But we're also, Heather's going to be making presentations with regard to what it means for personnel, what it means for us to be paying competitive health care. Those are all data points. And so to me, it doesn't hurt us to have many different data points that help us make the best decisions that we're capable of. And data is something that substantiates where you should be much better than feelings and thoughts and values that are abstract. It really helps you to understand. And so that's all I think we're talking about is, can we get a secondary data point for us to consider? And we don't know where that's going, but it's a data point.
So, yeah.
Heather Buchanan, Human Resources Director. I guess I'm up here for a couple reasons. First one is I appreciate what we're trying to do. The problem is we've had the direction from council that the services we're providing have been what the council has wanted. At this point, if there are members of council who would like services or products or people cut, it would be nice just to hear that from council rather than to trying to figure out what it is you do not like. So if council has specific items they would like to see cut, it would be much easier just to hear that up front than try to figure out what those are.
I get, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, that's what I want to figure out from what the department heads bring.
But we're about to go out and destroy relationships and morale in our department. If there are specific things you're looking for, it would be nice to hear it now. Because you're asking us to backwards collect data, which is very time consuming.
Well, okay. Well, it seems like everybody's head is exploding because everybody's assuming that we're saying, get rid of people. We've got 688 city employees, let's cut them by half. Nobody's saying anything about firing anybody. It's just,
I think
let's
Roger
just get
said it
information.
clearly.
That's it. It's just information.
And I guess I don't understand the word like, because what I'm looking for isn't attached to an emotion. What I was looking for by this request was a way to look at each department from the expertise of that department and say, if you ask me to do this, this is the most logical, least harmful way I could figure out to do it. Here's what that would look like. And I could do this to make that a little less awful, or there's nothing I can do to make it any less awful. That gives me a lot of information. And it's not based on whether I like that department or I don't like that department. It has nothing to do with my feelings.
And I'm not talking about like as in a program. I'm talking about when you cut a service. I know you guys are the ones who take the brunt out in the public.
Right.
So if there's something you're in particular looking for, it would just be nice to know that up front so that we can deliver on what you're looking for.
I think that what I'm hearing from Heather is and I agree wholeheartedly, we're doing the services we're doing, because that's what council at the time wanted to have happen.
Right.
And the council has continued to say that's important for us to have, so we're going to continue to do that. And that's why we're charging for that. There's some things that we can't cut. There's some things, I mean, you just can't.
Right.
There's no question about that.
Right.
But I think that council has wanted and asked for, and that's why departments are doing it. And I don't think there's one of them that have looked at it and went, you know, if council just didn't want to do this, then it would save me some money here. They're doing what council's asked them to do.
So I guess what is our process here? Because I feel as though we could spend probably till
Oh, we can spend hours
this
on
time
this.
tomorrow. And I guess that goes to my second point when Claudia was gone and you were asking about policies. What is the structure for these discussions? I mean, do we just like talk until the last person standing wins, or do we have some sort of process that allows, for example, to call the question? And yeah, I mean, I don't know what our process is here other.
Well, we can stop it real quick. I can say, all right, what do you want to do? Do you want 10%, 5%? You want to do this, go through this program or not? And we'll...
Well, and I'm just saying, I don't know what my question is bigger than that. I don't know what our process. I don't know by what structure do we, or rules, or whatever you want to call it, do we run our conversations? Because I'm looking at the dollars being spent with people listening to us, having conversations that are starting to feel like we've said what we got to say, and they're still sitting here with spending taxpayer dollars listening
well,
to
except
us.
for it affects them directly what we decide here, and so I've asked them to be here. I don't think that's costing taxpayer
Right.
dollars. I think that's actually using taxpayer dollars in an appropriate way instead of setting them up.
So
we can find out. Let's do it. You want to go through this process?
I want to hear the definition of what the process is going to be first.
Go through a process of hearing what departments would do if they were to cut
By
5%.
no.
Do you have a suggested percent?
I just voted on
You
that.
just voted. You just answered a question.
Okay.
And we're just saying yes or no to 5%.
Yes or no. Yes or no
'Cause
to.
I'm good with the exercise, but I'd rather go with a lower percent, so no.
Okay, Heidi.
Well, I'm also in favor of at least going through the exercise just to help get that information out to people. I don't know what the percent should be. You said 2% was terrible last
Well,
time.
2%
so
was horrible for
I feel like maybe we
departments,
should, I don't know if 5 is the right percent, so maybe no.
So you're a no on 5%.
I would go with 5% because I think we've obstructed what retooling is available for we're forgetting there's going to be requests that come from every department. And it could be, we can keep it flat by reallocating that 5% in what they've identified. So I'm okay with doing the exercise.
Okay.
I am too.
Okay.
I have two.
Okay, I don't like 5%, so I'm going to say let's talk about a different percentage. If we're okay with the exercise, I think it destroys relationships. So I'm not a big fan of the exercise anyway, but I understand why the exercise would be appropriate. I understand why the discussion, not appropriate is the wrong terminology, but I understand why it would be an exercise to go through. But it destroys relationships.
Well-
It tears relationships up, and I think
have a
it.
question.
And I think
I would hope that people don't think that it's all about we're like eliminating people's jobs. Like I'm
I
just
don't-
saying, like they could come to us and say, hey, we have travel and training of this, and if we don't go to it, we cannot go to it, but here's an example of something we learned at the last Public Works training, and we would not have had that if we didn't go
So-
to it. Like, more like that is what I'm sort of.
Exactly.
Maybe I
don't
should
know.
clarify. It destroys relationships within departments and morale within the city, but it also affects the public. And it affects the public in a way that quite frankly is not good. We did that with the PRT one spot, and everybody, the council said do it, and then we got blasted, and the council said, okay, why did you do that? You can't do that, and so it destroyed relationships, and it also hurt confidence in city governments from people that were using the services. And so
But
it's dangerous.
We're not making any budgetary cut. We're just saying, can you give us, here's a scenario.
Hypothetically,
Can you do this? Because it helps clarify. That's all. So I don't think it's analogous at all to cutting a position and then having the public be upset.
I don't think it's.
Can I
Yeah,
comment
go
on that?
ahead. Go ahead.
Didn't mean to cut you off. I totally understand what you're saying. You know, we want to see so that we can then, as Roger said, harvest what we want or not. But it's information that then maybe we would learn from. The part about you saying, you know, that this is just data and it's not, there's no emotion involved and everything, is, I think, overlooking the fact that for many in our city, our employees, there is emotion involved. Because in their mind, whether you're saying you're going to cut positions or cut people or cut programs or anything, they're worried that that is a possibility. If that is presented as something that hypothetically could be cut, then hypothetically it could be cut. And so there is emotion involved. And I think it's a mistake to just say, this is just data with no emotion. So I just want to put that out there.
Well,
to me,
I know.
interpreting the
But
data.
can I finish? I know what you were saying, that for you, you're not going on emotion. I'm just saying that for many people, this is emotional. So I don't think we can ignore that, or it's dangerous for us to ignore that fact, because you know, these are our employees, and we should be conscious of the fact that they may be worried. And that is, there's emotion involved in this. So I think we should be conscious of that fact. I also think, and I sound like a broken record, but I don't want to suggest that in our budget process in the past that we have not been trying to be as lean as we possibly can be. I don't disagree with you that it's our obligation to the taxpayers to be as lean and as efficient as we can possibly be. But that has always been our obligation. So that is something that we are trying to do always. And I just want to state that fact too. So
And I just want to say that I completely understand that people would be worried, okay? If their department head is looking at ways to cut their budget. I understand that. What I also understand is that that's part of life. I mean, it's
Nobody's
unfortunate
arguing
that we have to worry about things like that, but we're adulting. It's part of life. Things happen. My husband took a 50% pay cut a few years back. It happens. So and it's not that I completely understand people's fears and people's concerns, but it's life. It's just the way life is. So if their department head can come in at 5% and keep all their people, awesome, fabulous. You know, maybe if we get if we do this, then we can do that. let them figure it out.
And as I've said before, I'm not saying we shouldn't look at this process. I mean, again, I'd be comfortable with a lower percent. That's one thing to go through. I'm just asking us to be conscious of the impact that that exercise can have, and that it is emotional for many people. Whether it's life or not is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about being conscious of how our employees will be impacted by this exercise.
I am very aware. I've been in that same situation over and over again in my life. So I am very aware of what people will be thinking and feeling, and how they're going to go home and talk to their spouses about, oh my gosh, what if this happens? What is plan A? What is plan B? I am aware of that.
Well, one thing I would like to avoid is people running. We've got some expertise in the city that is very expensive expertise. And when you start looking at things like this, I don't want people to go, yeah, they may do this, I better start looking. And all of a sudden, we have a mass exodus of, 50 people that are experts that are, now we're trying to save money, but it's just cost us a ton of money because they've left, and we didn't change any budget or anything. We didn't do that. But now we're looking to replace all these people. So I think it's a dangerous exercise.
Well,
I got Roger, and then
I think this has to be interpreted much larger perspective than the ask that is currently in front of us. Employees know that we gave them a 6% raise last year, a little bit more, just slightly. Employees know that we have a retention plan that we're really trying to exercise. Employees know that we have developed a pay plan that is trying to get competitive. Those are all backstops for this. It's not like we're going out and trying to find employees to take away. That's not where we've been working toward, what we've been working towards. But we also need, I believe, on the part of being representatives of the public to our employees to say, we in due diligence need to know how we might become more lean. It doesn't mean we will become more lean, but we need to know if there is a way. And that's all the ask is to get the data for us to say we are in a position to make a decision.
And I wanted to just go back to and I'm going to interpret what I think Heather was trying to say, or was saying, sorry, not trying to say, but what Heather was asking us or suggesting that we do is not, whether we like a department or don't like a department, but if we have preferences or ideas about things that and I guess it's basically what our priorities are as a council. If there are areas that we would like to emphasize and other areas that we see as less important, it would be very helpful for us to let our staff know that and our department heads know that before they come and present. And even, if we're going to go through this exercise and they're presenting to us what they think we should cut, or what they think we could cut, let's say, it's hypothetical, that's great. We're relying on their expertise, but we might also have, sort of overarching ideas about direction we want to go in, that we, if we think as a council, and I'm going to just throw this out there because I'm looking at John, but let's say as a council, we think parks are not important, or just less important to us than something else. And that's totally an example. I'm not saying that's what we think, but things like that. Of course, we don't think that, John, but and maybe that's a bad example. But if there are directions, larger directions that we want to go in, we should tell them that before they go through the exercise of trying to figure out what they can come up with in their department to cut the percentage that whatever it's going to be, because they might, direct it in a certain way that we would have preferred they directed it in another way. So I think it goes both ways. We're asking for their expertise, but they're also asking to know what our priorities are so that their expertise fits within those priorities. And I think that's what you're
It's just very hard to say
suggesting.
that to the group of people that are responsible for your livelihood tactfully, so thank you for saying it for me.
Yeah, sorry.
So was your question basically a chronology question? So if the council ultimately decides to go with some version of my original suggestion, that prior to that being implemented, that council go through a similar process itself and say, are there areas that, that we don't think are as important? I didn't mean to look at you there. I mean, so was it an issue of chronology, or which is what I heard out of,
It's very
or
hard.
do you think there's some kind of covert agenda somehow up here that you think we ought to divulge?
I think it's very hard to please 7 people. So if you can give us directions on things that you're looking for, that would help. I don't really think this council does anything covertly, so I'm comfortable there. But if you have suggestions or things that you would like, it would be nice to hear those up front, rather than all of the legwork and the gathering of data points
Yeah, but
after the fact. It's really cautious.
if I could respond, there's a presumption with that ask, and that ask is that people already know what they want to do. You're saying what areas do we need to target, and I think the request is give us areas so we will be educated, so we will have all this stuff come in as a collective whole by which we can make some judgments. And I don't know what those judgments would be, but I really think that the ask for us to get very detailed and targeted, that's more than what I think these two ladies are willing to do, and I think that's more than anybody here.
And I didn't say detailed, I was saying, bigger picture, if we have some overarching priorities, not detail, because you're asking them to come back to us and suggest the detail. But if we have priorities that could direct that detail, we should let them know that.
So if we're not willing to tell them where we feel we need to cut, if that's not a fair assessment for us to do, I don't think it's a fair assessment for us to say, hey, where should we cut, you guys?
Well, I
Because
think
we
it
told
is,
them-
because they're the ones running their
We've told
departments.
them,
Well,
They're the ones who know.
but they're running them because we've told them,
Well, not we, the old council.
well, old council, new council, so what is the new council's interest, I guess is what the question is. What's the new, I'll put in quotes, council's interest in what services we want to provide to the public? Because the old council has said, this is what's important, this is what the city residents are paying for, this is what they expect. So what does the new council want to have on there, I guess, is the...
Mayor?
It's a hard answer is what it really truly
Could I
is.
just give one example? For example, last year, the budget we're in now, the 2020 budget, we set as a council a priority. A number one priority was raises, as high as we could go for all of our employees, and we have 3 different groups of employees that get paid in different ways, and so it was very hard figuring out, comparable raises for all of them, but we wanted to get that as close to equitable across the 3 groups, and that was our number one priority. Now, there's other priorities as well, but raises was the big thing, and we got that accomplished. So that's just one example of what I'm talking about as a priority that might direct what they're going to come back to us with. They get into the details, but if we have something as a council that we want to try to accomplish, and that might be this year, it might be, a little bit longer term than that, but if we have these priorities, it would help direct them.
So don't we do, my understanding from your presentation, Ashley, was that the council sets priorities. Is that, does that not happen on a regular basis? So I'm not assuming that we aren't going to do whatever priority setting as a council we've done in the past. I don't know if, Heather, if that's what you were, or if we have two different questions here. Or two different requests here. One being the one we've already talked about for however long we've talked about it. The second one being a request for council to essentially go through the same exercise. It'll be different, I get that, but essentially an analogous exercise as a body, and to decide if we have specifics. I'm not prepared right off just to start making statements about, cut this, cut that. Look, I'm without careful discussion and more information, because I realize that, I do not view myself in a position to say, well, I think that Tom should eliminate 10 vehicles. Right. I have no clue.
But see, that's the kind of detail that they would come up with. But we're not dictating.
Exactly. But I think it's a very fair ask, if I'm understanding you, Heather, to say, council, you guys need to get together, and if you believe that, I'm trying to pick something that will make sense but isn't,
if fixing roads is a priority.
Right. If you decide that fixing roads is something that you do not support, would you please tell us? I think that's a very fair request to make, and I think it's something that we have, as a council, we have a duty to do. I think it's different than what I'm asking. And I'm not prepared at this moment to have an in-depth discussion because I haven't done my homework.
I think the idea is that if we have an idea of what the council, what is important to you, then when the departments do an exercise like this, you're going to get the department head bias of what service they think that they should cut based on that percentage. Yes. But if it's different than what the council's thinking, then it's kind of just a waste of time. So I think that was what Heather was saying, is that, if we have an idea of what's important to the council, then as a department head looking at potential cuts in services, we're on the same page as to what service we want to look at cutting and what that's going to save.
But it may not even be cutting a service. It may just be doing something differently that is more cost effective. It's not necessarily.
But that's the details they'll come back to us with.
So I still don't know
how they do it.
It's not. I can't imagine that this council would have any view that would be vastly different than all the previous councils in terms of saying we don't need a fire department anymore. That's certainly not where I'm coming from at all. So it's not as though I can say, well, let's get rid of A, B, and C because we don't think they're important anymore. That hadn't even entered my mind.
No.
So I guess I still don't know. I'm clear what I'm asking and why. Well, it's not even me anymore. I'm clear about the suggestion I made and why, but I'm still not understanding what is being asked of me. I think setting priorities, I mean, I think we do have some due diligence to do in this, but at this point, we're going to set priorities, I'm understanding. If there's some further ask from employees, then help me understand exactly what it is, and I'll do my darndest to produce.
Mr. Mayor, I think you're asking for a hard evaluation of budgets by every department head. And really, I think they already do that. Knowing that the CPI is about 2.7 to 3% every year, and they're asked to come in with a flat budget, knowing that our insurance costs are going up, they're already taking a hard look at their budgets to the tune of 3 to 5% every year. And I think that simple ask of coming in absolutely flat is accomplishing what you guys are talking about.
Because it's already down.
Yeah, it's a smaller budget every year.
Well, I disagree, Rick, because if you look at what the CPI is and what the record of our budget over 10 years is, we have grown far more than that CPI. And the CPI includes healthcare costs. So that's already included in that. I asked that years ago, and I had the affirmation that it's included as cost of living. It might
Our
not.
healthcare costs are going up a lot more, Roger, than 2.7%.
Well, I'm saying that when you look at somebody's salary at 40,000 and understand, I'm just using a number, you can go up 8%.
We did.
And that's not going to be higher than your cost of living.
Pardon?
If you go up 8% and it's 2.7 or 3, and you're just figuring it on a little narrow part of it, and it's 3,200, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, no, wait. If it's not $3,200 increase. I'll have to get back to you on that. But I do know that when you're looking at a fragment of a salary and compensation, and it's significant, but it's not the whole enchilada, because there are other costs that we have made sure that we've outpaced healthcare. That's what the raises did too. We've included healthcare and we've given raises on top of healthcare, right? The 6.4 did not say, now we're going to take your healthcare out of it, right?
It was just salary.
Okay. And so when we do salaries, when we do all the things that are structured in, and we do healthcare costs, I understand that, but we have had a budget increase of 42%, I would guess, when the CPI comes out under 20%. I'm just talking big picture. And I think it's important that we understand how we're getting there. And that's all this is give us the information. It's a request to help us be educated with what you would do if you were asked to do a cut of 5%. And that's off the table, so 3%, 2%, 4%. I don't know where it is. The people are making the decisions, whether they're even going to suggest any salary as part of that. And I think that there will be people that tell you out of the limelight here that they can see savings in their departments. They can. And I'm not saying we're going to take them, but it's real informative to know where the department functions and what they see as their key functions and what they see as the functions they will protect and what they might make available for discretion.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
And I, again, agree that we need to take a hard look at our budget. We need to be as responsible as we can. But I disagree with the idea that departments are thinking, or department heads are thinking out there privately that there's places they could cut, and then they're not proposing those when they come and present to us. I think that they're already trying to do everything they can to be as lean as possible. And that is already kind of enforced by the fact that if you present a flat budget, you're actually presenting a lower budget because your costs and everything are going up. So they're already having to figure that out, and I don't think that they're keeping from us a way that they could save money. I think they're doing everything they can to save
I
money.
think we're seeing some efficiencies there. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Heather, because I don't know. It's the first time I had heard insurance was tied in with the CPI.
I don't know. I don't track the city's CPI itself. I use the federal numbers in October for establishing what I asked for salary.
Do they include insurance in that? I mean,
It's all in, it's a huge average. Our average insurance is way higher
because
than CPI.
I know
way higher.
we took a huge hit the last 10 years.
Yeah.
We've never seen a reduction.
CPI goes from the cost of fresh cut flowers to the cost of health insurance to the cost of tires, and those are all averaged together. I can tell you the city's average for the 3 years I've been here has been 9.051 each year for healthcare.
For healthcare, and the CPI over that same time has
That
been.
does not take into account the fact that we made the deductibles higher and we made the co-pays higher. That does not take that into account.
All the things we've done to the health insurance are not included.
That's been one of the things that you hear often is you give me a 2% or a 1% or a 6% increase, but it's eaten up by the cost of insurance in itself, and so that I don't know. I didn't.
Well, the other part of that is, when we were running in the campaign last year, I knew what one person's house had gone up that was an employee of the city, let's say. And we gave them a sizable increase, but we took about $600 of that increase back just in our taxes. Just in our taxes.
Pocatello taxes are the overall county.
The overall county.
No, the Pocatello taxes alone.
All I was asking for is to council go through the same exercise that you're asking department heads to do. And I'm sorry if that's inappropriate. I just feel like.
Can I just stop you right there? You should feel free to say whatever you feel you need to say. It's not like I'm gonna get rid of her.
That's nice in concept, but that is
don't.
not the reality of being a public servant. All I'm asking for is council to give us direction so we can then get you details.
But we're the same. We're public servants too, Heather. It's not.
But
You
ma'am,
don't.
you're asking us to do something you are unwilling to do.
No, I'm trying to clarify what it is. I'm totally in support.
But you're asking us to bring cuts, but you're not providing any examples. That's my point.
Well, I think that at the end
Well,
of the day.
I guess I could look at Tom's budget and say, okay, Tom, here are some suggestions.
And that's why I mentioned programs.
But that wouldn't be I can't see how that would be useful to him, because it would be me giving him advice that I'm not in the least qualified to give him. And to me, it's much more respectful to say, you're the expert in your area. Can you please show me what this would look like? That's.
I think I still am of the opinion this is a very, very dangerous exercise to ask staff to go through. I do think that it's fair we're out talking to public. What services does the public want or not want? What are we providing that the public does not want or does not care about? I think that's the important
if you
piece.
want what we got as our feedback, put the branding into something else. That was the number one area that the public reacted to that this council approved. The number two area, they get conflated. The number two area was council should not have got a raise and you shouldn't have got a raise. That's what we heard more from the public than anything else.
But that is not even close to 2% of the city
I know,
budget.
but I'm saying that is what we heard.
0.000 something.
That is what we heard, if you're talking about areas. And the public, they looked at some of the things we threw on at the end. They looked for us not making the hard decisions, which is, I think that's all we're trying to say is enable us to know where the decisions can be made, perhaps. We're not saying we're going to make any decisions. And, if you got a 6% raise and now you feel threatened because you got a 6% raise, we've done the structuring for competitive pay. We've really worked to preserve your retention. If all that is threatening because we ask you to look in your department, see if there's any savings that can be gleaned, I don't know what kind of world we're operating in, because you're asking for everything and you're not giving us information that allows us to say, we understand where you're operating from, we condone where you're operating from, or we think there are some things that could be taken.
And I'm not saying, I feel like that veered so far outside of my scope that I apologize if that's where I got you. All I am asking is if there are things that council has in mind, to please articulate those to us now so we can bring back details and our own thoughts.
Could we do that after we've had time to think about it, just as we're letting departments know?
And I'm not asking today, but I'm saying we're already in our budget builds. We're already working on upcoming tasks. We're running out of time to get you data without, if there are going to be clarifying points or if it will just be our decisions, recommendations.
And I guess we could have started, had anyone recommended to me that we have our first budget prep meeting on January 2nd, I would have said, you know better than I do, let's go for it. In terms of me, which is I'm the only person on the planet I'm comfortable talking about in terms of what's going on inside my head. I'm starting at the first opportunity that the structure I've been given has allowed. And so I don't know. I don't know how else it could have been done other than me trying to impose my structure on the city, which didn't seem like an appropriate plan. I'm sorry if somehow considering doing some things that haven't been done within the budgeting process previously is now an imposition, and I guess the only thing I can do is plead ignorance because I'm simply following the structure that I've been told to follow.
So I guess as we're looking at this, we're going to need to make a decision to have lunch ordered in or do what we want to do here. So are we interested in the staff going through this process during this budget build, or are we interested in us having a discussion about some things that we could hear and or a combination of both?
I think we should have both discussions. I think one question is, does the council as a body want our departments to engage in this exercise? And I think the second question is the council willing to engage in an equally rigorous consideration? Me personally, I'm a yes on both.
Me too.
I'm for both.
Sorry, what is the thing word?
So do you want the staff and us to go through this process to decide, staff to look and see what it does to their budgets to if we reduce it a certain amount, and we'll get that amount in a minute, and us as a governing body to come with ideas of what needs to be cut, what the public and us we're hearing needs to be reduced. Was that clear as mud? Because I'm not 100% positive, but I think the thing is, let's both go through the same exercise.
And, yes, theoretically, I'm okay with that, but my understanding of our part of it would be that it would be a little bit different than their part, that we're not going to go through and come up with the details of every department of what they, how they should do it. That's the part they would be presenting to us, but that we would talk about like overall directions and priorities and everything. And absolutely, I think that is something I'm willing to do, and I think we should do. But we're not talking about details.
No.
That's what they're doing.
Yes.
Is that was my understanding.
There's two questions on the floor, I guess. One is, are we interested in having the staff come to us with an idea of where they think there could be some efficiencies? Maybe, I think you're going to find out that staff's going to come back and say, without you giving me directions on what services to cut, I can't find any, but there might be some. There might be some, and then the second question is, are we going to sit there and sit down and decide what we feel the public is not interested, what services the public's not interested in having?
Or, if there need to be cuts, where we would rather see those cuts and where we would rather not see those cuts, like that, sort of the bigger picture priorities.
Okay, I guess the reason why I'm still not sure what exactly it is we're deciding on right now is because I think we have to acknowledge that the three of you kind of ran on a campaign of we're going to take this deep dive into the budget, and you're coming in here with that total motivation, okay? Like, we can't sit here and pretend that that's not what you told
I'm not
people and
pretending.
that that's not what you're going to do. So your point about it being a dangerous exercise, I totally get it. What I'm trying to help us do is come to a middle ground and not just say it has to be 100% this or it has to be 100% a dangerous exercise. Can we come to a way where it's not 10% to where it's affecting morale and people are freaking
Well, it's
out
already
that
not
everybody
10%.
Well, I know, but I'm saying, can we come to a point where it's not that, and a point where it's not a dangerous exercise, and it's a way for us to, when people in the community ask us, what is the deal? Why is the government wasteful? We have something concrete, because I can tell them right now, it's not wasteful. I've been and I visited the departments. I've gone and I've looked at this, and I go through the budget process every year, but it's kind of like, well, whatever, like it's just some way of us saying, well, we went through the exercise and the department came and said to us, we'd have to sell off, a couple of our smaller parks. We'd have to, eliminate this many, whatever. We'd have to not ever go do travel and training. And we did not feel like that is what the citizens wanted. So citizen that is asking me to please cut, I'm telling you, would you like that thing to go away? And they will say, no, absolutely not.
So
And
it
we'll
shows
say-
them in
And we will
concrete
say,
terms.
yes, that's what we thought, and that's why it is what it is. That's kind of what I'm trying to hope that we can do without making it like an adversarial thing. I don't want to waste a lot of time, and I don't know, maybe we're getting hung up on the percentage, but maybe we can just start, maybe next year it can be a percentage if the exercise is successful. I don't know, but maybe we can just say, department, just be prepared to come to us and say, we are running the leanest operation that we possibly can. Here are some things that we've done that are efficient. If you were to tell me that I had to, if something crazy happened and we all of a sudden, the legislature or whatever, and we had to cut, this is probably where it would end up being, and I wouldn't be happy with it, and
This is the
probably the
impact.
citizens wouldn't either. This is what the impact is, but it's just kind of like, then if even if it's just that small little statement, if it prompts the council as a whole to say, well, actually, now that you bring that up, maybe we'd like you to get more into the details of that, because maybe that's actually like a good idea, then we can get like super deep down from there. But if we're like, no, 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 we're not doing that, people will freak out, nobody's gonna want that, then we know, like, can we keep it on a more simplified for the first go round? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, let's not make it a big, horrible thing, but let's go through it so that we can go through it.
My suggestion, with 5% or 3%, but no, my suggestion stands that I want to see from the expertise of the department. So, and we start talking about eliminating and cutting. I don't know where the notion of reduction. So let's say that I sell tickets 5 days a week, and that costs me X amount because of staff. And then I say, golly, you know what? I've been asked to reduce my budget, and so what I'm going to do is I'm now going to sell tickets 3 days a week. I haven't eliminated a service, but I have saved money. I don't know how we got to cutting people and eliminating services. I didn't get there. Other people got there.
Well, when you say eliminate by 10%, that's what...
I didn't say eliminate.
You said reduce by 10%.
I said reduce your budget by 10%,
But that
which is now 5%.
But Chris, if
And
you're
it may
eliminating-
include some elimination.
That's up to the
If you're cutting
department.
selling
Right.
tickets 2 days a week and you haven't cut the person who's doing that, you haven't saved a dime.
Well, I wouldn't need somebody in the office selling tickets 5 days a week if I
Where are you
had.
gonna do that person?
Right.
How are you gonna get those people the other 3 days?
So it involves an elimination,
I
potentially.
understand that, but you can't reduce.
Can we ask if
You
anybody
can't
wants to
reduce the
say
amount of water in a water
But
bottle
to
without
answer your
eliminating some of the
question,
water.
but that's how we got there, because
But-
reduction very possibly involves elimination.
So the bottom line question is, are we just going to be frozen in a status quo where we say to the public, there is no way to reduce the city tax ask? It's impossible, just trust us. We already are doing everything that's humanly possible.
And we're not saying
Or are we willing to try to come up with some ways to gather data points, which then allow us as a council to be both more informed and more strategic, and to partner with our employees, who are also taxpayers for the most part, in figuring out how to run this ship as lean as possible.
Okay, so I have a question. We've got some pretty smart people out there, because I'm extremely confused of exactly how we are going to do this, and I don't see it going anywhere right now. As department heads, you've heard the story, you've heard the things. Is there a middle ground? Does anybody out there see a way that we can wrap this discussion up a little bit about coming to a middle ground and making it a feasible thing?
So, I'm lucky.
Come on up here so the people that are watching are
Richard Bigelow, building director and also facility maintenance director. So I'm fortunate in the building side, we generate revenue. It goes into the general fund. Ashley showed that in the slides through building permits and everything else. But we run on a very, very small staff. I have 3 inspectors. This morning when we checked our messages, we had 14 inspections, and this is our slow season. So, and we have to go to training to keep our continuing education credits so that we can keep our certifications to provide these services. And our contractors are paying for these services through the permit fees, and the state says that we have to have these done in a certain amount of time. And so we're very lean, we're understaffed. If the building boom continues to grow, and we're also contracted with the city of Chubbuck to do their inspections, my guys are already working overtime, and I don't know how in my budget currently to save 2%, because I have to pay for fuel, I have to pay for maintenance, I have to buy books because state statute says I have to keep a certain amount of code books. You know, my hands are tied, yet the extra revenue goes into the general fund. So we're running as lean as we possibly can and still trying to provide the best service that we can. And so I can't cut positions because state says that we have to, you know, have building inspections and electrical and plumbing and mechanical. So I don't know where to cut from.
Could I use Richard's information as an example that maybe, so realizing that I'm thin on details here, so yours might look like you come in and say, okay, so basically in the state says this and this and this and this. So once I take those fixed things, the only place I can cut is to cut vehicles.
Correct.
And then the impact on the public is I can't send my inspectors out unless they ride bicycles, and that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And there is no way that motor scooters won't get the job done. And then it is absolutely clear for your area that, you know, then I know what to say to the public if they say, and it's not that's all I'm asking for, because then that gives me a much clearer understanding.
I don't have an issue coming before council and going line item by line item of this is what my budget is, this is what we spend, and this is the service that we are performing. My hard part is I don't know where to cut 5% because I have to, the citizens are paying for these services.
Right.
You know, I'm not fire, I'm not police,
Right.
where they don't generate the revenue. So it's, for me, that's hard. And I've been sitting back there scratching my head going, man, how do I present these numbers? And am I gonna get in trouble when I come before you saying, I need your assistance because, you know, here's the data. I don't know where to cut. I'm lean. I need to hire a part-time electrical and plumbing inspector to help carry the load, so I don't burn out my staff. I'm going to need extra vehicles, and we're very cautious on that. But so it's kind of a double-edged sword. We're trying to come in flat, but I still have to perform a service, and I don't know how. And then on the housekeeping end, I mean, I don't know how. It costs X amount of money to keep the floors mopped and toilet paper. And, you know, now we're worried about the coronavirus. So, you know, hand sanitizers and dish soap, and, you know, we put extra garbage cans in and people are using more paper towels. That all costs money. So I'm like, Heather, help us figure out how to cut, if we need to cut. Or just saying that when we present our budget, that knowing that we're trying to be diligent with our taxpayers' dollars and trying to stretch those funds as far as we can and provide the best service for this great city. Because that's why I moved back here. I love this city. It's a great community, and I want to be able to provide the best service that we can. And I think that's how most of my colleagues feel. And
But nobody's, first of all, nobody's saying or even implying that you're not doing that everybody in this room is not already doing that.
And I didn't take that from you.
Okay, please, I'm not trying to offend anybody or anything like that. But what I'm hearing from this side of the room is we feel like our departments are running as lean. We feel. All I'm saying is, can we see?
Well,
That's it. That's all I want to see. I just want to see, because
and that's fine. I mean,
that's
I'm
it.
more than happy to send you the budget. I mean, it's public record, and it's broken down in line items of how we're spending.
So I think that if that's what we want, though, I think that if that's what we want is just to see that we really truly are running lean, I think that happens during the budgeting process.
It does.
Because I think we have comparisons on other cities and things like that on the number of people. So if that's what it is, then by all means. But if not, then and we want to cut, I guess I'm trying to find out if there's even a way, and it's an unfair question to the staff to say, is there a way to fix what we can't figure out up here? How to do this?
And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just
And I
trying.
didn't take it that way.
And I'm just trying to sit back there and figure out how to provide you guys the information that you want. That's wrong, what you're asking for. Because we do run very, very lean.
Okay. Richard, for example, I would, if this were to be something you had to face, I would think that the deep assessment we'd expect you to make is, can I any longer provide services to Chubbuck based on the load I carry here in Pocatello? You know, has my load got to the point that now then my services have to go to Pocatello? I can't provide service. I don't know that, but that's something that I expect you to tell me in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because
And
if
we're
you're
gonna
getting
present
stretched,
that data.
if you're getting stretched, and if you need a part-time person, you got that part-time person working for you. You know what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
And that's what we need to tell, you need to tell us, because we don't know. We're not there day in, day out. We don't know who sits around. We don't know who's going 100 miles an hour. All the hours are on a shift. You know, that's the type of stuff.
Yeah, and that's my job, to manage my department. I'm just trying to figure out how to get the information that you guys are asking.
So let's do this. Let's wrap this up. I'm not interested in, I know that he's back there. We're going to hear the same thing from the chief. We're going to hear about having to cut so many people to get down to a 10% or something like that. Okay, McCoy's saying, all right, chief, tell me what you're saying here. Corey, one of you come up here and tell me. Because I think that we're not going to get anywhere if we don't run the budget, run an exercise. Let's run an exercise and go from there. I think we're destroying relationships as we speak right now. So let's, Chief.
Sure. So Chief Roger Shy, and I got at the table with me Major Jim McCoy from Pocatello Police Department. And maybe this could bring some closure to this. Being a part of this budget process for several years, every year we bring a service level report to the council when we do our presentations. And what that does in that service level report is it shows what services we provide at what and what we do and how our departments are broken down. That information is given there, and it gives the council concrete things of what we do and why we do it and why we need those dollars. So I think we already do what you're asking to do in our budget presentations through our service level reports. Now, our service level report slides got cut down to like 10 last year. We can add some information into our service level reports if you would like that. But we would have to know what specific information that is wanted in those service level reports so we can add that information in, present it to council, and then we can go back and say, we don't want this service. We'd have to look at that if that's what you want. But we do provide this service. I can tell you that if it's even a 5% or a 2% cut, you're looking at reducing personnel. There's no way we can go about without reducing personnel, and that's services. That means over the last 2.5 months that legal department, police department, fire department have all been working together with all these critical incidents that's happened in the city. The training that we have spent on our officers has saved the city money by not having bad things happen. And I think we need to look at it. I don't want to look at the 6 inches in front of our face and spite our nose to, So I think that we already do that. But if you're looking at that, it's going to reduce people. There's no way around it.
So McCoy, did you have anything?
Yeah, we've been talking about lean and running lean. You can always run an engine or a department leaner, but at some point you lose efficiency. And there's a difference between running things efficiently and running things lean. And we need to focus on doing things more efficiently. Of course, doing things efficiently translates usually to technology, which is expensive. Okay? That's the first thing. And I think what everyone is asking and what we want from council before we dive into our budgets and cut 10, 5, 2% and say we can get rid of this and this is what it's going to do to the community is what we call in the military commander's intent. What is your vision for the city of Pocatello and the services that you want us to provide. We have to have that knowledge before we can decide where we can become more efficient. That's all that we need from you.
Well said.
I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, it was the police department that came and cut the service in terms of attending funerals, giving escorts. It was the police department that really reduced the number of what I would say, it's not domestic battery. It's like when you go out and you referee between two parents over custody. There's been real reductions
Civil
in that.
standbys.
Yeah, so there have been, but that was led by what you saw, not what we saw, as the essential reduction in service to be able to provide something else. And I think that all that's being requested here is help us identify those things. Where you see other areas that we could have some reductions in, so that maybe we have some we've saved some ammo over here, so we can buy some ammo over here. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand that completely.
Yeah.
And all I'm asking from you is, what is the priority? What does the city council see as the needs of the citizens? How can you best serve them and us best serve our citizens through you? And we need to know what your priorities are before we can look at our budget and say, this is important, this isn't. Because as the chief said, 2%, 5%, 10%, you're talking people.
So, you're right, we do have a service level report that comes with the budgeting process. Why don't we continue to do that? That way people will have an idea, we will have an idea of what services are provided, and then we'll have the ability to make a recommendation one way or another during the budgeting season on cutting it. And that way we'll know. But in saying that, recognize that we're looking for some efficiencies, and what efficiencies are there. If you can find some efficiencies, let's find them.
And can we maybe approve adding a couple more slides?
Well, we'll just tell them.
Back into the presentation that they can show us, in detail what you're doing to keep us lean.
We will have them add what they need to do to do that if we need to. We can have them add
I think
that.
one more thing as the council digests this is that we work with each other. Like, I can't function without legal or HR or fire and ambulance. We all work with each other, and if Jared has a question, he comes over and asks my expertise, and we provide them with the service. If Heather has an issue going on with an employee issue or an outside issue where she needs police, we come over and help each other out on a daily basis. So those things do happen. We need each other. So.
Okay, so we're going to find some efficiencies. With that, we have got some other things, I'm sure. It's 12:30. I'm going to take a few minutes break right now so that we can have them bring some lunch in, and I believe there's some other policies that we would like to take a look at.
I don't know what our decision was here. It seems as though we've talked about at least 3 things, and I have no idea what we've decided on any of them.
Okay, so let's take a break, and when we come back from that, we will take care of
I
that.
appreciate that.
Thank you for joining us after the break. It was a little confusing on if it was a long break or a short break, and I apologize for that. We're going to try to get through some more policy discussion. I know that Ashley has an appointment at the county at 1:30 to go over property taxes and try to figure out what they're doing with property tax to get them sent to us correctly and stuff like that, because there's some confusion there right now. So.
It'll be 20 minutes before lunch is here.
Okay, so that'll be a perfect amount of time for Ashley to be able to grab a sandwich or something and get to the county. Sorry, Ashley. She's dying over there on us. The discussion was, what are we doing? And I think that, I honestly think that going through the budgeting process, we're going to see the efficiencies, unless I hear differently, see what we're doing efficiently wise. And I think we're going to be able to get some answers to some of these questions. Honestly, I think we're going to see some of that stuff, but I want to have, if we feel like we need to do some more of that, let's move to some other budgeting things, and then let's have an internal discussion at lunchtime on this, so that we're all clear, and then I can explain to staff where we're headed.
I guess where I'm confused, and this is going to be an attorney question. How do we move this process on when there's no action item stated? How do we make motions? And how do we, how do we define the parameters of our discussion enough that we know what we're talking about?
Great question. Jared Johnson, City Attorney. You're right. Today's agenda item is a discussion on the policies. It's not an action item. There can be no motion and there can be no final decision from the council. But I think it's agendized correctly. It is discussion about these things. And at some point, you're going to have an agenda item that says you will be making, if you decide amongst yourselves that that's within yourself, that that's what needs to happen, that there needs to be something other than what we are planning on doing, that needs to be an agenda item where a motion is made and a majority of the council supports that direction.
Can we make a motion for it to be an agenda item?
No, without an action item on the agenda, there can be no motion.
So when do we ever get to exercise our legislative opportunity as a council member if we do not get to make a motion at any time?
So that's what I would suggest, is any one of you, as we've discussed, can ask the mayor to put something on an agenda, and he has always done that. And if you ask for it to be something that can specifically have a motion, it will be an action item, and you can do that at that point.
Okay.
So what I'm understanding is essentially, theoretically, the council has no real capacity, other than the mayor's goodwill, to get any item on an agenda.
Well, no, I didn't say that. Any time any council member has ever asked the mayor to put something on the agenda, he has done that.
And that's with his goodwill, and that's what I mean. So, but in theory, if he weren't such a goodwill guy, and he did not agree to put something on the agenda, essentially the council would have no way to bring a legislative issue concerning our fiscal duty to the agenda.
In theory, if he refused to put it on the agenda, that would be a problem, but that's never occurred. And I'm not aware of any case anywhere that that's occurred.
And we have a number that have been, several that have been requested and are apparently pending. But anyway, so as an attorney, do you think that as a council we ought to have some version of Robert's rules or some alternative to that by which we run our meetings so that we can effectively, can we, so I guess it's a two-layer question. Can we use something like Robert's Rules of Order, which obviously involves motions, etc., but we're not making a decision about, in the legal sense, we're using it as a way to organize our discussion? Can we do that?
Legally speaking, yes, if you as a council decide to adopt rules of order for your meetings, you can do that. I definitely have some concerns about those. And the reason I have those concerns is the same concerns that city attorneys across the state have. And that is, if you violate the procedures of those rules, the action that you take might become null and void by virtue of that violation. At this point, this council has not adopted any rules of procedure other than what's found in state code, which are very limited rules as to how your meetings are run. Obviously, your rules couldn't supersede state code. If you wanted something more formal and more that changes that format that doesn't supersede the state code, you could do that, but you would need to do that, in my opinion, by ordinance and make it part of the Pocatello City Code, which would require a majority of the council.
I'm going to make an assumption here based on the many lawyers I've known over my longer than I wish life. You guys can be pretty linear when it comes to, So do you have a suggestion for how, as a council, we might organize our discussions to be more effective and less time consuming that would not, go outside
I really don't, other than having an agenda, which we always do, sticking to that agenda, wait to be recognized by the mayor. It makes for orderly discussions. It makes so that there's not people talking over other people. It makes for minute taking that's more efficient. Less is more when it comes to those types of governing bodies meetings. And I've had this discussion many times with many city attorneys across the state. There are some cities that have a simplified version of Robert's rules that they follow, and they have in those simplified versions that violations of these simplified rules do not result in null and void decisions. That's an option. Those attorneys don't care for it. They like councils that are just simply able to discuss, deliberate, and make decisions. So if you stick with the agenda, you do it by motion, you do it by resolution, the mayor recognizes the speakers, that usually takes care of all the procedural issues that make a meeting effective.
Mr. Mayor? And that was my understanding of our process. I seem to recall back when I was new on the council and we were being trained that you said something, and I hope I'm not getting this wrong, that we don't use Robert's rules, and you gave the reasons, why you don't prefer those, and that the process was really more of a parliamentary process, but that it was kind of loose, but we are supposed to be recognized by the mayor and speak one at a time, and that's basically our process.
Correct.
But when we have action item on an agenda, obviously, then we can make motions and vote on those, but not in a meeting like this. But it's still, there's some order.
Correct.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, that's the same training that's been, as far as I know, given to new council members for several years in the city of Pocatello. Why we don't have a set rule, we make motions, we have second to those motions, and then by state code, the majority vote carries the motion or does not carry the motion. The state code also says that the mayor sets the order of the agenda, and that's why the mayor can move things around on the agenda. Yeah, we've always just used that process, and it's, as far as I understand, always worked for the city just fine.
I thought at the AIC meeting, they suggested that the council can make motions that put things on an agenda.
That's right, and what they suggest is that if you want to do that, that you have an agenda item on the agenda that talks about options for agenda items for future meetings. So you're not discussing something on the agenda. I know, but what it would be is an agenda item that says.
But you want formality. This is the formality.
That's right.
Council, the agenda item would say, council may wish to take this time to discuss topics for future agenda items. You wouldn't act on those topics, you wouldn't deliberate on those topics, but you would discuss and have a motion as to whether that topic should be on a future agenda.
But that isn't.
Speaking of agendas, we're a long way from where we started.
Well, this issue came up, Councilwoman Stevens asked about the process, and I think as we're talking about budgetary policies and processes, this is definitely a little wider than that, but it's relevant to the budgeting process and how things that council members want to see discussed get in front of the council.
Yeah, because I really feel like we danced all around on 4 to 5 different topics in that last go-round. We didn't focus on one topic. We brought a whole bunch of other stuff into it.
But this is a discussion.
That's part of a discussion thing. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, what other budgeting policies would we like to see? We'll discuss at lunchtime what this other one here.
One of the things I think, in lieu of what may be happening at the legislative level, I think we ought to consider a freeze on hiring until we know what happens at the legislative level, because it could curtail our ability to address real concerns we have to do if we fill positions and stuff that aren't, the council needs to approve them. I just think that that's part of showing some restraint in making sure we monitor where we may be arriving at based on the legislative decisions that could really curtail our ability to move.
I agree.
And you're talking about like new or additional hires, or what about replacements? What if someone leaves?
The council would discern whether that is an essential position. We've done this before.
We've gone through that. And
It's just, you meet and you say, show us how essential it is, and we decide. And I just think it helps us to build up some revenue for next year if we absolutely need it. And it's just a way of being responsive to the legislature.
Okay, something to think about so that we can have that discussion at the, probably have some of this discussion at our third week meeting. That seems to go longer. Any other policies that we'd like to see on the, I'm sorry, Chris.
I would like to have HR look at overtime expenditures and make recommendations relative to what might be done appropriately to try to reduce the amount of overtime expenditures that we have.
Okay.
I can go on if you want me to.
Or if I don't see anybody else, so go ahead.
Okay. I would also like us to examine areas in which city-sponsored activities may be overlapping or duplicating services provided by other entities in the community, to see if we need to be, and I'm thinking of an example might be, I don't know, a baseball team, something like that. And then I would like to have us create some guidelines for reviewing, ranking, and granting monies to our non-departmental.
Before you go on, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to clarify the one before the last one you said about city sponsored
activities.
the baseball team example. I don't understand. I'm not following.
I think the baseball team was just an example.
Right.
Into our head,
but I'm not following the example. So can you just explain?
As a city, are we offering an opportunity to youth in the city, for example, that is duplicating something that is offered by some other non-governmental entity in the community, and therefore do we want to keep doing that? Is it important? Or do we look at maybe scholarshiping, using the money that we currently use to run a program ourselves? Do we maybe not compete with community entities, and maybe we redirect money to be scholarshiping kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch to participate in already existing? That would be, like I say, that's kind of what brought it to mind. But as I say, examine, because I don't know.
Let's look and see if we are sponsoring any city-sponsored activities that other agencies are doing the same thing, and
dance classes might be one, I guess. I don't know what else.
The whole rec center would be a duplication.
So,
although weigh that against whether it's something that brings in revenue and whether,
right. Right, but that's why I say, just take a look at it.
Yeah.
Okay. You keep going, I'm not seeing anybody
All
else
right,
raise their hand.
Yeah, I think we give, I think it's non-departmental is the term. So the city gives money to various non-departmental entities, and I would like us to have a set of guidelines, if not an actual application, so that we have a way to review those and rank them, and so it's not an arbitrary system, but it's a more objective system. And then I would also like to have us, and maybe we already do this, I don't know, make sure that how we get reports back on the funds granted and the projects achieved is that we help the entities to whom we give money by giving them some kind of an outline for what we want to see in a report, so that we're very answerable.
So are you talking about like Family Services Alliance, SECA,
Sister cities.
sister
Right.
cities,
Whatever's
those
in the
things, those, okay.
Panic
non-departmental.
development. I mean, it'd be the same
Right.
type of thing.
And then should any, and this depends in part on, what is imposed on us by the legislature, but if we get to a place where any positions have to be cut, that we ensure that we use reassignment and attrition to the largest extent humanly possible. So that we don't have people losing their jobs or losing jobs. I would like to see us look at combining all ordinance enforcement efforts into some kind of a united effort, rather than having the enforcement officers in the police department and the enforcement officers in animal control. I'd like to see us combining our enforcement efforts to see if we can get any more efficiencies, because clearly from the town hall, ordinance enforcement is a huge deal for the public.
Would that be a budgetary thing, or would that just be a separate discussion about the policy?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know. It might
Something to
have.
discuss, I guess, and figure out.
Yeah, and if it's not, it might not be appropriate for budget.
The part of that might be budgetary is, I think it came out in the town hall that we clearly don't have enough code enforcement
Right.
people.
Right.
I mean, people that are doing that to keep up with
With the demand.
the need. So that would be the budgetary part, is that might need to be adding people.
Or we might be able to pull off a 0.5, somehow, but I don't know.
Sure.
But anyway.
Okay.
And then I would like to see us create, and this ties into the long-range plan notion, a systemized way to start doing set-asides for large projects. Because we don't get to some of the big things that we talk about as though they're really important, because we can't afford them all in one chunk. So how could we systemize those considerations? And then I'm curious, and Heather, you might need to help me out here. I think I know that the city has steps, right? Advancement steps. I think I know that we have a ton of them compared to other organizations where steps have been there. So I'd like to see us look at that and see if in fact we have a ton of them. Do we need as many steps? What exactly are we trying to accomplish with those steps? And I'm guessing from all the expressions that I'm asking a question that's been asked and considered previously.
So our pay scale, when it was originally created, was built for pay for performance. We've been trying it for a couple of years. During my budget cycle this year, you will hear that I'm going to ask us to amend the pay scale to just regular steps without the pay for performance, which will consolidate it from the 37 steps down to like, I don't know, 18, 15. So you will see that coming. It's just not ready yet.
Okay. All right.
It's in work. We
Okay.
check mark on that one.
Okay.
But also, just to clarify too, we have, as far as I understand, 3 different systems for different groups. The police have steps, but they have less
6.
steps.
They have 6.
6 steps. The fire don't have steps, so.
But they have longevity, which is
They
a
have
step.
longevity, so it's somewhat comparable, but there was a reason that we got to the 37
It was for
steps.
pay for
and-
performance.
Yeah, and that was a few councils ago, I
It
think.
was.
There was a,
You're going to see it this year. It's just not ready yet.
Okay, all right.
Well, that's a policy, it sounds like it's already been working on.
Great. And then I'd like to see the ceiling at which council needs to approve budgetary expenditures dropped. I think it's $24,999.99 now, is that right?
It's
Or
50.
It follows the state.
State law.
It follows the state bid
Right.
law on that.
But we can be more stringent, just not less stringent than the state. So I would like to see, something like, I don't know, again, this is where my inexperience will show, and I don't know what the number should be, but I would like to see it be, 25,000 or something less. And then in concert with that, however, I'd like to see a streamlined way of departments making those requests. I don't know that we need a full-blown presentation about it. Everyone should we drop that ceiling.
They'd all have to be on the agenda.
Right, but it could be, we could do it more like a consent agenda. For example, here's the report, a brief summary from you or whoever would be appropriate. Are there any questions, etc., rather than having to increase the number of specific long presentations.
Okay. Roger.
I had one similar to Chris in terms of, I really do think that our budget process ought to anticipate some of the big projects that we keep putting off. And I could name a lot of them, but somewhere along the line, we'll never get to do big projects if we don't budget for them. We'll never get to do a river investment. We'll never get to do a golf course gathering center.
The clubhouse.
Clubhouse.
There we go.
Those type of things that somewhere we've got to have in our big plan that we're going to accumulate so much money, and 5 or 7 years from now we can do one of them, and 5 or 7, because we just put off the big stuff for a lot of the little stuff we do. And so I would like for us to get somewhere in the thing to at least start targeting what our big things are.
Chris.
How do we now deal with health insurance once someone retires? I mean, so I know when I retired, I could get my sick days 2 for 1, but they could only be used for me to pay health insurance costs.
So a municipality works a little different than a school district. You can't use your sick days. What we do is we cash those out based on the percentages in the handbook, and they're rolled into your HRA VIVA account, which can be used for premiums and costs. It can't be used for like a Christian exchange where you co-op buy.
Right.
Last year, we split the experience from retirees from active employees. They are still partially subsidized. This year, you will also see me come to you and ask to entirely remove the retiree
I was
plan.
going to ask if we could
I have the experience now that we can actually look at separated,
Okay.
so you guys can see that information.
Great.
So we had
thank you.
those discussions last year, and so
Okay.
just a
You'll get that
continuation,
second
it
big
sounds
piece
like.
this year to see
Great,
it.
thank
Okay.
you, thank you. And then I have one more, which is that I would like, just for transparency and accountability, to have all council and whomever the law covers, I would like to have us need to fill out like a quarterly or biannual financial statement showing any benefits that we got, like if somebody bought me a, $50 ticket to a dinner, because aren't there some, I think there are some laws, are there not, around how much benefit an individual can accrue in a year? And I would like to just see us be really transparent about that, and sign off that, yep, nobody, 10 people didn't buy me $100 tickets for fancy dinners this year. I don't know.
We can't do that. I mean, we can't accept a $100 ticket. That's against the law.
Right, I get that, but I just would, for
So we're not doing it.
Well, for
she's saying that
transparency
if
and
you-
accountability, I
You
would
can
like
get to
to,
100 by a whole bunch of $5.
I would just, I just think that in the interest of what's good for the goose is good for the gander, that we ought to be accountable and transparent about that.
That's outside of budget discussion.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Okay.
All right.
It's okay to hear some of these
All right.
things that we're thinking.
and related to that, I'd like to see a budgetary limit on the amount that that the city will spend on me to go to events and so forth and so on. I'd like there to be, something more like a cap. So, okay, Chris, you've got X number of dollars, and you can, if you want to, request that to go to this event versus that event, that's up to you, but we're not just going to pay for every event that you might want to go to as a council member.
Okay. Anything else? Anything on this side? All right. Ashley, we're sorry we kept you here longer.
It's okay.
I know that our lunch is there. If you would like to go and grab something there, I apologize.
That's all right.
I know that you've got to rush to the county, and so that will be good to get that figured out. So thank you very much. Then with that, seeing no other things, then we are adjourned from this meeting.
You can't figure anything out.